My wife told me her parents were taking their final breaths. She rushed to Atlanta to be by their bedside, holding their hands as they slipped away into the great beyond. I wanted to support them, so I drove 12 hours straight from Chicago with a trunk full of medical supplies and a heart full of worry. I did not even stop for coffee. But when I quietly let myself into that Buckhead mansion hoping I was not too late, I did not find a hospice scene. I found a champagne tower. I found a string quartet playing upbeat jazz. And I found my son-in-law standing on a table laughing about the stupid old man who paid for it all. That stupid old man was me. Before I tell you how I turned their celebration into a funeral for their bank accounts, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone who actually signs the checks. I am Elijah Vance, 71 years old. I spent 40 years in the logistics business moving freight from the Rust Belt to the coast. You do not survive 4 decades in shipping without learning how to smell a bad deal. But they say love makes you blind, and apparently it also makes you deaf and dumb because I missed every warning sign. My wife Loretta had been in Atlanta for 3 weeks. Every night she called me, whispering into the phone, sounding like her soul was breaking. She told me her father's lungs were failing and that her mother could barely lift her head. She said the medical bills were piling up like snowdrifts in a Chicago winter. Every time she called, I wired money. $5,000 for a specialist, $10,000 for a private nurse, another $8,000 for special equipment. I did not ask for receipts. You do not ask for receipts when family is dying. You just pay. That is what a man does. He provides. But something in her voice last night felt off. It was too rehearsed. I know the sound of grief and I know the sound of guilt. I could not sleep, so I packed the car. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to be the strong shoulder she could cry on. I drove 700 miles fueled by anxiety and black coffee. I pulled up to the address Loretta gave me in the exclusive Buckhead district of Atlanta. I expected to see a dark house with drawn curtains. I expected to see a ramp for a wheelchair or maybe an ambulance in the driveway. Instead, I saw a line of cars that looked like a dealership showroom. There was a yellow Lamborghini, a silver Porsche, and a vintage Jaguar. A valet in a red vest stepped up to my dusty Ford truck and looked at me like I was the garbage man. "Can I help you, sir? Deliveries are round the back," he said, looking down his nose at me. I did not correct him. I have been looked down on by men in fancy vests my whole life. I just nodded and drove around the side. If there was a party going on while my in-laws were dying upstairs, then someone was going to answer to me. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but not from fear. It was a cold rage starting to boil in my gut. I parked behind a catering van. I could smell roasting beef and expensive perfume wafting out of the open windows. I took my hat off and smoothed down my gray hair. I walked to the service entrance. The door was propped open with a crate of champagne bottles. I slipped inside. Nobody stopped me. When you are an old black man in a work shirt, people tend to look right through you like you are part of the furniture. I was counting on that. I walked through the kitchen, dodging waiters carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. I heard the hum of conversation growing louder as I approached the double doors leading to the main ballroom. I pushed the door open just a crack. The room was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing light onto women in evening gowns and men in tailored Italian suits. And there, in the center of it all, was my family. My wife Loretta was not wearing black. She was wearing a shimmering gold dress that I had never seen before. She held a flute of champagne and she was laughing. Her head was thrown back and she looked radiant. She did not look like a woman whose parents were on their deathbed. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. Next to her stood my daughter Tasha. She was wearing diamonds around her neck. My diamonds, the ones I gave Loretta for our 30th anniversary. Tasha was clinging to the arm of her husband Gavin. Gavin, my son-in-law, the man who claimed he was building the next Google but never seemed to have $1 to pay for dinner. He was standing on a raised platform holding a microphone. He looked like a king addressing his subjects. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" Gavin shouted over the music. The room went quiet. He flashed that white smile that always made my stomach turn. "I want to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To the official launch of Gavin Tech. They said we could not do it. They said we did not have the capital. But look around you. This is what success looks like." The crowd cheered. I stood in the shadows behind a heavy velvet curtain, gripping the door frame so hard my knuckles turned ashy. Where were the sick parents? Where were the oxygen tanks? Gavin waved his hand to quiet the applause. But I have a confession to make, he said with a smirk. I did not do this alone. I had a silent partner. An angel investor, you might say. Loretta giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. He is a very special kind of investor, Gavin continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He is quiet, he asks no questions, and best of all, he thinks the cloud is something that rains water. The crowd erupted in laughter. Gavin pointed to the ceiling. To Elijah Vance he shouted, the man back in Chicago who thinks he is paying for kidney dialysis right now. Thank you for the champagne, Elijah. My heart stopped. The air left my lungs. I watched my wife, my Loretta, raise her glass to the toast. She clinked glasses with Gavin and took a sip. He is so gullible, it is almost sad, Tasha said loud enough for the front row to hear. Daddy thinks he is saving lives, but really he is just funding the lifestyle we deserve. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I reached into my pocket for my nitroglycerin pills. My vision blurred for a second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march out there and flip that table over. I wanted to grab Gavin by his silk lapels and throw him through the window, but I froze. Decades of discipline kicked in. In the logistics business, you do not make a move until you have checked the manifest. You do not start a war until you have the ammunition. If I walked out there now, I would just be the angry, crazy old man. They would call security. They would gaslight me. They would say I was confused. I looked at Loretta one last time. She was smiling at Gavin with a look of admiration she had not given me in 20 years. That look cut deeper than any knife. The betrayal was absolute. They had not just stolen my money. They had stolen my dignity. They were laughing at my love. They were mocking my labor. I took a deep breath and swallowed my pill. My heartbeat slowed down. The cold rage in my gut solidified into ice. I stepped back into the kitchen, letting the heavy door swing shut silently. A waiter bumped into me. "Watch it, old man," the waiter snapped. I looked him in the eye. "I am sorry, son," I said, my voice steady and low. "I was just leaving. I have seen enough." I walked back out to my truck. The valet was still parking fancy cars. I sat in the cab of my Ford and looked at the house. It was glowing with light and noise. They were celebrating their victory. They thought the game was over. They thought they had drained the cow dry. I picked up my phone. I did not call Loretta. I dialed a number I had not used in years. "Saul, are you awake?" I asked. "Elijah, it is midnight," Saul grumbled on the other end. "Is everything okay?" "No, Saul," I said, watching the silhouette of my son-in-law in the window. "Nothing is okay. But it is about to be very interesting. I need you to open the safe. The one with the red handle. We are initiating the Omega Protocol." Saul was silent for a moment. "Elijah, that is the nuclear option. If you pull that lever, there is no going back. That destroys everything. I know I said starting the engine. They wanted a ghost investor, Saul. I am going to be the ghost that haunts them for the rest of their lives." I put the truck in gear and drove away into the dark Atlanta night. I left them to their champagne, let them drink, let them laugh. Because tomorrow the bill comes due and I am the one doing the collecting. I slipped through the service entrance while the valet was distracted by a red Ferrari. The catering staff was in chaos, running back and forth with trays of lobster tails and Wagyu beef sliders. Nobody looked twice at an old black man in a dark suit. To them, I was just another pair of hands, another invisible gear in the machine that made their night possible. I grabbed a silver tray of empty champagne flutes from a side table and held it against my chest like a shield. I walked into the ballroom and the noise hit me like a physical wave. The air smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. I kept my head down, pulling the brim of my cap lower. I moved through the crowd, navigating the sea of silk dresses and tailored suits. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a sickening realization of just how much of my money was burning in this room. I saw faces I recognized. There were business partners I had introduced to Gavin. There were friends from the country club where I paid the membership fees. They were all here drinking my liquor, eating my food, and celebrating my financial demise. I felt like a ghost walking through his own wake, except everyone was happy the deceased was gone. I made my way toward the VIP section near the fountain. That was where I heard her voice. My daughter, Tasha. She was holding court on a velvet sofa, surrounded by 3 of her sorority sisters from college. They were laughing so hard their heads were thrown back. I slowed my pace, pretending to collect empty glasses from a nearby table. I needed to hear this. I needed to drink the poison so I could build the immunity. "Oh, come on, Tasha," one of her friends said, swirling her drink. "Are you serious? Your dad really has no clue." Tasha took a long sip of her martini and smirked. "The girl I used to carry on my shoulders to see the parade. The girl I sat up with all night when she had the chicken pox. She looked at her friends with eyes that were cold and dead. He has absolutely no idea, she said. You have to understand, my dad is old school. He trusts paper. When he got COVID 2 years ago, he was so scared he was going to die. He was gasping for air in the ICU, and I brought him the papers. I told him it was for medical directives so the doctors could treat him. She paused for dramatic effect, and her friends leaned in. It was a durable power of attorney granting full control over his retirement accounts and his investment portfolio. He signed it with shaking hands, thinking I was saving his life. The friends gasped, but then they giggled. That is savage, Tasha, one of them said. But is it legal? Tasha shrugged. It is legal enough. By the time he figures it out, the money will be washed through Gavin's company shell accounts. We already moved the $2 million from his pension fund to buy this place. He thinks that money is sitting in a conservative bond market. He thinks he is leaving a legacy. She laughed, a sound that curdled the blood in my veins. The legacy is us, honey. We are just spending it while we are young enough to enjoy it. Why wait until he dies? He is going to live forever with all those vitamins he takes. We just accelerated the inheritance. I gripped the silver tray so hard the metal bit into my palms. $2 million. That was 40 years of waking up at 4 in the morning. That was 40 years of missing birthdays because I was supervising a shipment in a freezing warehouse. That was the money I saved to make sure my grandchildren went to college, and she was spending it on martinis and a house to impress people who did not care about her. I felt a tear, hot and angry, prick the corner of my eye. I blinked it away. I could not break down now. Not here. I turned to walk away, needing to escape the sound of her voice before I did something that would land me in jail. I kept my head down, focusing on the pattern of the marble floor. Suddenly, a heavy body slammed into me from the side. The impact knocked the breath out of me. The tray slipped from my hands. Crystal glasses shattered on the floor with a crash that silenced the nearby conversations. A dark red stain spread across a white linen suit jacket in front of me. I looked up. It was Gavin. He was holding an empty wine glass, looking down at the Cabernet Sauvignon dripping from his lapel, his face twisted into a mask of pure ugly rage. "You stupid idiot," Gavin roared, pushing me backward. "Look what you did. Do you know how much this suit costs?" I stumbled but caught my balance. I kept my face lowered, my chin tucked into my chest. If he looked me in the eye, he would know. He would see the fire burning there. "I am sorry, sir," I muttered, pitching my voice low and raspy. "It was an accident." "Accident," Gavin scoffed, wiping at the stain aggressively. He snapped his fingers at the other guests who were watching. "This is why you cannot hire good help anymore. They are either lazy or incompetent." He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. He poked a finger into my chest. My chest. The chest that had shielded him from bankruptcy 3 times in the last 5 years. "Clean it up," he hissed. "Get on your knees and pick up every piece of glass. And if you cut yourself, do not bleed on my floor. This marble is imported." I stood there for a second. The old Elijah, the father who wanted to be loved, wanted to apologize. But that Elijah died the moment Tasha laughed about his signature. I slowly bent down. I did not kneel. I crouched. I picked up a jagged shard of glass. It reflected the light from the chandelier. It was sharp. Dangerous. Gavin kicked at my shoe. "Faster, old man." I froze. That kick, that disrespect. It severed the last thread of emotional attachment I had to this family. I stood up. I did not clean the mess. I left the glass scattered on the floor, a minefield for their expensive shoes. "I will get a mop, sir," I said. "Just get out of my sight," Gavin spat, turning his back on me to apologize to his guests. "I hope they fire you." I walked away. I did not go to the kitchen. I walked straight to the guest bathroom down the hall, the one with the gold-plated fixtures I had unknowingly paid for. I locked the door behind me. The silence in the bathroom was heavy. I walked to the sink and turned on the cold water. I splashed it on my face, washing away the sweat and the shame. I looked up into the mirror. The face staring back at me was tired. The lines around the eyes were deep. The hair was gray, but the eyes were different. The sadness was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a man who had negotiated contracts with union bosses and mafia frontmen in the 80s. I was not Elijah, the doting father, anymore. I was not the confused old man they mocked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. It was simple, reliable, and untraceable by modern apps. I opened a text message to Marcus, my oldest friend, and the only man I trusted with my life. He was waiting for the signal. I typed 3 words. Execute Omega Protocol. I hit send. I stared at the screen until the confirmation checkmark appeared. A grim smile touched my lips. Enjoy the party, Gavin, I whispered to the empty room. Because tomorrow morning you are going to wake up in a world where you do not own the shirt on your back. And that imported marble floor is going to feel very cold when you are sleeping on it. I adjusted my cap, straightened my borrowed jacket, and unlocked the door. The ghost was leaving the building. But the haunting was just beginning. The engine of my Ford truck hummed a low, steady rhythm as I pulled away from the manicured lawns of Buckhead. I left the champagne towers and the fake laughter behind in the rearview mirror, but the anger sat in the passenger seat next to me, heavy and suffocating. I drove for 40 minutes, leaving the gated communities and the luxury shopping centers, until the streetlights became dimmer and the potholes became deeper. I was heading to the address Loretta had given me for the specialized respiratory clinic where her parents were supposedly receiving round-the-clock care. I had pictured a state-of-the-art facility with glass walls and doctors in crisp white coats. That was what I was paying for, after all. $10,000 a month covers a lot of premium medical attention. But when the GPS announced that I had arrived, I was staring at a crumbling brick building on the edge of an industrial park. The sign out front was missing letters. It read Oak Seek Nursing Home. There was no security guard. There was no valet. Just a flickering fluorescent light buzzing over a metal door that looked like it had been kicked in a few times. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness for a moment. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. This was the place. This was where my money was going. I grabbed the bag of medical supplies I had brought from Chicago, the high-quality masks, the vitamins, the comfortable blankets. I felt foolish holding them now. I walked up to the front desk. The lobby smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage, the universal scent of places where people go to be forgotten. A nurse with tired eyes and a stained blue scrub top looked up from a stack of paperwork. Her name tag said Brenda. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice flat with exhaustion. "I am here to see Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am their son-in-law, Elijah Vance. I drove down from Chicago." Brenda stopped writing. She looked up at me and her expression shifted from boredom to confusion and then to something that looked a lot like pity. She took off her reading glasses and set them down on the desk slowly. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, "there must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said, pulling out my phone. "My wife Loretta told me they are in room 304. She said they had a rough night. I just want to sit with them for a while." Brenda stood up and walked around the desk. She reached out and placed a hand on my arm. Her hand was warm and rough, the hand of a woman who worked hard for a living. "Mr. Vance," she said, looking me right in the eye, "the Johnsons are not in room 304. Room 304 has been empty for weeks." My stomach dropped. "Did you move them?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Did they get transferred to the hospital?" Brenda shook her head slowly. "Sir, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson passed away 3 months ago. They died within 2 days of each other during the flu outbreak." The world stopped spinning. The buzzing of the fluorescent light seemed to scream in my ears. 3 months. 90 days. But that is impossible, I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "My wife, she sends me updates every day. I just sent a wire transfer last week for their oxygen therapy. I sent $5,000 for a private specialist." Brenda walked back to her computer and typed something in. She turned the screen so I could see it. There it was in black and white. Date of death 3 months ago. Next of kin notified Loretta Vance. "We called your wife immediately," Brenda said. "She came down here the next day. She cleared out their belongings. She told us not to call you. She said you were suffering from a heart condition and the news would kill you. She said she would break it to you gently when the time was right." I stared at the screen. The letters blurred. She used my heart condition as an excuse. She used my vulnerability to cover her greed. And the body, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What happened to them?" Brenda looked down at the floor. Mrs. Vance authorized a direct cremation. No service. She said there were no funds for a funeral. She picked up the ashes in 2 cardboard boxes. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. No funds. I had sent $50,000 in the last 3 months alone. I had sent money specifically for a prepaid funeral plan 5 years ago. I thanked Brenda. I did not yell. I did not scream. I walked out of that building with the bag of blankets still in my hand. I walked to the nearest trash can and dropped it in. My in-laws were gone. They had been gone while I was worrying about them. They had been gone while I was working extra consulting hours to pay their bills. I sat in my truck and did the math. It is a curse of being a logistics man, you always do the math. $10,000 a month for care, $5,000 for specialists, emergency transfers, medications. It added up to over $40,000 in the last 90 days. Where did it go? The answer flashed in my mind like a neon sign. It went to the catering company for Tonight is Party. It went to the lease on the Lamborghini parked in the driveway. It went to the vintage champagne Gavin was spraying on his guests. They were partying on the graves of her parents. I started the truck. I had one more stop to make before I called Saul. I needed to see where they ended up. Brenda had mentioned a small community cemetery where the county buried people with no insurance. I drove 5 miles to a dark, quiet plot of land near the highway. The grass was overgrown. I used the flashlight on my phone to read the markers. It took me 20 minutes to find them. There were no headstones, just 2 small metal stakes with plastic cards inside them, the kind temporary markers they use until the real stone arrives. But there was no real stone coming. The plastic was yellowed and cracked. Johnson. That was all it said. I fell to my knees in the dirt. My suit pants were ruined, but I did not care. I touched the cold metal stakes. These were people who had welcomed me into the family when others turned their noses up at a truck driver. These were people who made me sweet potato pie on Thanksgiving, and their own daughter had thrown them in the ground like trash so she could buy a dress. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. I cried for them. I cried for the betrayal. But mostly I cried for the fool I had been. I stayed there for a long time until the cold seeped into my bones. Then I stood up. I wiped my face. The tears were done. Now it was time for business. I pulled out my phone again. My thumb hovered over Saul's name. I pictured Gavin's face when he made that toast. I pictured Loretta laughing. I pressed call. It rang 3 times before he picked up. Elijah Saul said, his voice sharp. I am looking at the accounts. You were right. They moved the money. I know I said looking down at the plastic markers one last time. Saul, I am at the cemetery. Loretta's parents are dead. They have been dead for months. There was a silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Oh my God, Elijah Saul finally said. That is fraud. That is criminal fraud. It is worse than fraud, Saul, I said, my voice turning to steel. It is evil. I walked back to the truck. Saul, listen to me carefully. I want you to freeze everything, not just the bank accounts. I want you to put a lien on the house. I want you to contact the credit bureaus. And that land in Mississippi, the one Gavin wants me to sell. Yes, Elijah. Draft the papers I said, but not for a sale. Prepare a deed of transfer. I am giving it to the church. Elijah, that land is worth $500,000, Saul warned. I do not care, I said, slamming the truck door. I want to see the look on Gavin's face when he realizes his golden goose has flown the coop. And Saul, one more thing. Yes. Find out who holds the note on Gavin's business loan. I have a feeling I might be buying some debt tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I looked back at the Buckhead skyline glowing in the distance. They were probably cutting the cake right now. They were probably toasting to their cleverness. Enjoy it, I whispered, because the bill is coming due. And unlike me, the IRS and the fraud squad do not accept apologies. I put the truck in gear and headed north. The mourning period was over. The war had just begun, and I was bringing the heavy artillery. 2 days later, I was sitting in my favorite leather armchair in the living room of our Chicago brownstone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It used to be a silence that brought me peace after a long week of managing logistics for the Midwest Distribution Center. Now it felt like the silence of a tomb. I had spent the last 48 hours scrubbing the house, not because it was dirty, but because I needed to do something with my hands to keep them from shaking. I had placed a photo of Loretta's parents on the mantelpiece. It was an old picture taken at a barbecue 20 years ago. Her father was laughing, holding a rib bone, and her mother was smiling at him with that look of patience only strong women possess. I lit a candle next to it. It was a small act of respect, the only respect they would get in this house. I heard the key turn in the lock. My heart did not jump. My pulse remained steady. I had taken an extra beta blocker. I needed to be ice cold. The door opened and in walked the performance of a lifetime. Loretta came in first wearing a black dress and a veil. She was leaning heavily on Tasha, who was also dressed in designer mourning clothes. They looked like they had stepped out of a magazine spread about grief. Tasha was wearing sunglasses inside the house. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane. I did not need the cane, but it was part of the costume now. The costume of the frail, helpless old man they thought they were robbing. Loretta. I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell it. You are home. Elijah, oh Elijah! She wailed and threw herself into my arms. I held her. I held the woman who had slept beside me for 40 years. I smelled her perfume. It was the same scent she wore at the party in Atlanta, the scent of betrayal. My arms felt heavy like lead, but I patted her back. I am so sorry I was not there, I said, looking over her shoulder at Tasha. Tasha was checking her phone behind her mother's back. She quickly hid it when she saw me looking. It was awful, Elijah. Loretta sobbed, pulling away and dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Just awful. They went so fast. 1 minute they were breathing and the next, gone. Both of them. I led her to the sofa. Sit down. Rest. You must be exhausted from the funeral planning. Tasha sat in the armchair opposite me, crossing her legs. Her shoes were new. Red bottoms. Christian Louboutin. $700 at least. Paid for with the money meant for her grandmother's oxygen tank. The service was beautiful, Daddy, Tasha said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. We bought the lilies Grandma loved, and the casket was mahogany. Top of the line. Mahogany, I repeated, nodding slowly. That is good. They deserved the best. I pictured the plastic markers in the overgrown grass. I pictured the cardboard boxes of ashes. The rage flared up in my stomach, hot and acidic, but I swallowed it down. And the pastor, I asked. Did Reverend Jenkins conduct the service? Loretta stiffened for a fraction of a second. Just a twitch. If I had not been looking for it, I would have missed it. No Elijah, she said quickly. Reverend Jenkins was unavailable. We had a hospital chaplain do it. It was very intimate. Just family. Intimate, I said. That is nice. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my cane. I looked deep into Loretta's eyes. The eyes that had lied to me about grocery bills, about car repairs, about where she was on Tuesday nights. Loretta, I have to know. Did your mother say anything at the end? Did she have any final words? The room went silent. Tasha stopped swinging her foot. Loretta looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. My grandmother's ring. She did, Loretta whispered, looking up at me with tears that finally looked real, though I knew they were tears of guilt, not grief. She called your name Elijah. She asked where you were. She said, tell Elijah I love him and thank him for everything. Something inside me snapped. A final tether that connected me to this woman severed with a loud mental crack. My mother-in-law had died alone. She had died wondering why her daughter never came. She had died probably thinking I had abandoned her because Loretta stopped paying the bills. She never called my name because she was too busy fighting for breath in a state facility while Loretta was shopping for that dress. It was the cruelest lie she could have told. And it was the mistake that sealed her fate. I see, I said softly. She was a good woman. I reached into the inside pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a white envelope. It was thick. Loretta, I know I could not be there, I said. And I know how expensive funerals are these days, especially with mahogany caskets and lilies. I do not want you worrying about money while you are grieving. I placed the envelope on the coffee table. I scraped this together, I said. I sold some of the gold coins my father left me. It is $50,000. Loretta's head snapped up. The grief vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a hunger so raw it was ugly. Her eyes locked onto that envelope like a wolf spotting a wounded deer. Oh, Elijah, she said, reaching out but stopping herself, trying to maintain the charade. You did not have to do that. That was your father's collection. He would have wanted it this way, I said, pushing the envelope closer to her. Take it. Pay off the funeral home. Buy yourself some time to heal. Tasha stood up and walked over, picking up the envelope before Loretta could even touch it. She opened the flap and thumbed through the cashier's check. A smirk played on her lips. Thanks, Daddy, she said. You are the best. This will really help Mom settle the estate costs. I watched them. I watched the relief wash over them. It was not the relief of a grieving family being supported. It was the relief of addicts getting a fix. I knew exactly why they needed this money. Saul had told me the details this morning. Gavin was in deep. He owed money to people who did not send late notices in the mail. He owed money to people who sent guys with baseball bats. The party in Atlanta was a desperate attempt to lure new investors to pay off the old sharks. But it had not worked fast enough. The loan sharks were calling. This $50,000 was not going to a funeral home. It was going to a shell company owned by a man named Russo in the South Side. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because I had marked the check, not with ink, but with a digital trail. The check was issued from an account that Saul had set up specifically to be monitored by the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I had tipped them off anonymously that Gavin was laundering money for Russo through family accounts. By handing them this check, I was not just giving them money, I was handing them a pair of handcuffs. "I am going to go lie down," Loretta said, clutching the envelope to her chest after taking it back from Tasha. "I have a migraine." "Go," I said. "Rest. You have a big day tomorrow." "Why? What is tomorrow?" Tasha asked, looking suspicious. "Oh, nothing," I said innocently. "I just meant healing takes time. Each day is a big step." They exchanged a look. A look that said he is losing it. They left the room, heading upstairs to count their loot. I heard them giggling as they reached the landing. Giggling. 2 minutes after talking about a funeral. I sat there in the silence again. I looked at the photo of the parents. "I am sorry," I whispered to the empty room. "I am sorry I have to use your memory as a trap. But I promise you I will clean this mess up." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Gavin. "Hey Dad, heard you helped Mom out. You are a lifesaver. Literally. Love you." I stared at the screen. Lifesaver. He had no idea how right he was. I had just saved his kneecaps from Russo's bats for another week, but I had traded his physical safety for his freedom. I did not reply. I deleted the message. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago street. The wind was blowing dead leaves across the pavement. Winter was coming. Let them have their night. Let them cash the check. Let them think they pulled one over on the old man, because tomorrow I was going to make a visit to the bank, and then I was going to pay a visit to Gavin's office. It was time to introduce my son-in-law to the real Elijah Vance, not the retiree, but the man who once stared down a union strike with nothing but a clipboard and a glare. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The morning sun in Chicago was pale and offered no warmth, much like the report sitting on my mahogany desk. My lawyer Saul had come over personally to deliver it. He did not trust email anymore, not with what we were dealing with. He sat across from me, nursing a black coffee, his face grim. "Elijah," he said, tapping the thick stack of papers, "it is worse than we thought. There is no Gavin Tech. There never was." I picked up the dossier. My hands were steady now. The shock had worn off, replaced by the cold mechanical precision of a man who used to coordinate freight logistics across 3 time zones. I flipped through the pages. I saw bank statements. I saw wire transfers. I saw the trail of my money, the $10,000 a month for my in-laws' medical care, the emergency funds for surgeries that never happened, the $50,000 I had just given Loretta for the funeral. It did not go to research and development. It did not go to servers or engineers or patents. It went to offshore gambling sites. It went to a crypto exchange in the Bahamas. It went to luxury car leases and designer clothes. And the house in Atlanta. Saul continued, his voice low. "It is owned by a shell company registered in Delaware called Blue Horizon Holdings. The sole director is a man named Dante Russo." "Russo," I repeated. The name sounded familiar. He was a loan shark from the South Side, a man who broke legs first and asked for payment second. "So my son-in-law is not a tech genius," I said, closing the file. "He is a gambler who got in over his head and used my retirement fund as his personal ATM to pay off the mob." Saul nodded. "And he is desperate, Elijah. The $50,000 you gave Loretta buys him maybe a week. He needs a big score. He is going to come for the big assets." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. I looked at Saul. He stood up and gathered his briefcase. "I will let myself out the back," Saul said. "Be careful, Elijah. A drowning man will pull anyone down with him to survive." I walked to the front door, leaning heavily on my cane. I opened it to find Gavin standing there shivering in the Chicago wind. He was wearing a camel hair coat that cost more than my first car. He held a bottle of Macallan 25 in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. "Dad," he exclaimed, flashing that bright white smile that used to fool me. "I just had to come see you. Loretta told me you were feeling down. I wanted to check on you personally." I stepped aside to let him in. "You drove all the way from Atlanta just to check on me?" I asked. "I flew," he said, walking into the hallway and looking around as if assessing the value of the furniture. "First class. You know how it is. Time is money." We sat in the living room. He poured the scotch into 2 crystal glasses without asking. He made himself at home. He stretched his legs out on my ottoman. So Dad Gavin started taking a long sip of the expensive whiskey. "I have been thinking about you, about your legacy." "My legacy?" I asked, playing the role of the tired old man. "Yes," he said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "You have worked hard all your life. You deserve to see your wealth grow exponentially. You know the tech launch was a massive success. Investors are fighting to get in." I nodded slowly. "Is that so?" Huge, Gavin said. "But I held back a specific tier of equity just for family. I want you to be part of the future, Dad. I do not want you stuck in the past with these old bonds and savings accounts that earn pennies." He set his glass down. "I know you have that land in Mississippi," he said casually. "The old farm." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. That land was not just a farm. It was 40 acres of pecan trees and soil that my great-grandfather bought with money he earned picking cotton as a free man. It was the first thing a Vance had ever owned that could not be taken away by a master. It was blood and sweat and history. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Well," Gavin said, dismissing the history with a wave of his hand, "it is sitting there doing nothing. It is a liability, Dad. Property taxes, maintenance, it is a drain. I have a buyer lined up, a developer who wants to put up a strip mall. He is offering $500,000 cash." He paused, waiting for me to be impressed. "If we liquidate that asset now," Gavin continued, speaking faster, his desperation starting to leak through the cracks in his charm, "we can put that $500,000 directly into the Gavin Tech liquidity pool. My algorithm is generating 40% returns monthly. In a year, that $500,000 becomes $5 million. Think about it. You could buy an island." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had never worked a blister onto his hands in his life. He was talking about selling my ancestors' freedom to buy imaginary coins. "I do not know, Gavin," I said, scratching my chin. "That land has been in the family for 4 generations. My father made me promise never to sell it unless it was life or death." Gavin sighed loudly. He stood up and paced the room. He ran a hand through his hair. "Dad, look," he said, his tone shifting from persuasive to patronizing. "I love you, but you have to wake up. This is the 21st century. We do not build wealth by hoarding dirt anymore." He stopped in front of the fireplace and turned to me. "Why do you people always want to hold on to land like it is some kind of magic talisman?" he said. "It is just dirt. Elijah, it is sentimental garbage. The world is digital now. It is crypto. It is the blockchain. You cannot eat soil. You cannot trade pecan trees on the NASDAQ. You have to stop thinking like a laborer and start thinking like a capitalist. You people." The words hung in the air. He did not mean old people. He meant black people. He meant people like me who came from the mud and the struggle. He was telling me that my history was worthless compared to his digital fantasy. My hand tightened on my cane. I wanted to stand up and shatter his jaw with the heavy wood handle. I wanted to tell him that the dirt he despised was the only reason he was standing in a warm house drinking 25-year-old scotch. But I did not strike him. Physical violence is the tool of the weak. And I was not weak. I was a logistician. I was a planner. And I just found the perfect place to bury him. I let out a long sigh and slumped my shoulders as if defeated by his superior logic. "You are right, Gavin," I said softly. He stopped pacing. He looked at me surprised. "I am." "Yes," I said. "I am old. I am stuck in my ways. Maybe that is why I never made the big money like you. Maybe it is time to let go of the past." Gavin's face lit up. It was like watching a shark smell blood. "That is the spirit," Daddy said, rushing back to pour me more scotch. "You are making the right decision. I will have the papers drawn up tonight. We can sign them in the morning." I held up a hand. "There is just one condition," I said. "Anything, Dad?" "Anything," Gavin said. practically salivating. I took a sip of the scotch. It burned going down. A good burn. "If I'm going to invest $500,000 into your company," I said, "I want to do it properly. I want to meet the chairman of the board." Gavin froze. "The chairman?" "Yes," I continued. "You said Blue Horizon Holdings is the parent company, right?" I looked it up. "Very impressive. I want to sign the contract with the chairman of Blue Horizon. I am an old-fashioned man, Gavin. I like to look a man in the eye when I give him my family legacy." Gavin swallowed hard. His Adam apple bobbed. He knew Blue Horizon was a shell. He knew the chairman was likely a fake title he gave himself, or worse, it was Dante Russo, the loan shark. "Oh, well," he stammered. "The chairman is a very busy man, Dad. He is based in Zurich. He travels a lot." "I can travel," I said, leaning back. "I have nothing but time. Or better yet, invite him here. If he wants my $500,000, he can come shake my hand." Gavin laughed nervously. "Dad, that is not how modern business works. You do not just summon the chairman." "Then no deal," I said simply. I picked up the remote and turned on the television. I ignored him. Gavin stood there. He was trapped. If he said no, he lost the money. If he said yes, he had to produce a fake chairman or bring a criminal into my house. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Okay, Dad. I will make a call. I will see what I can do." "Excellent," I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. He walked out of the room, pulling out his phone. I watched his reflection in the window. He looked terrified. I waited until I heard him go into the guest room and slam the door. I pulled out my own phone. I texted Saul. He took the bait. "Find out everything you can about Dante Russo. If Gavin brings him here, I want to know what size shoe the man wears before he steps on my porch." I looked at the picture of my great-grandfather on the wall. He was standing in front of a wooden shack holding a shovel. He looked tired but proud. "Do not worry, Papa," I whispered. "I am not selling the land, but I am about to use it to dig a grave for a thief." Gavin thought he was playing chess with a senile old man. He did not realize he was playing poker with a man who could count cards in his sleep, and I was holding all the aces. The game was just getting interesting. And tomorrow I would finally meet the man who was pulling my son-in-law strings. I poured myself another drink. To the chairman, I toasted to the empty room. "May he be as stupid as you are, Gavin." The next morning, the atmosphere in my house was thick enough to choke a man. It felt less like a family breakfast and more like a shark tank where the water had been chummed with blood. I sat at the head of the table, my hands trembling visibly as I tried to lift my coffee cup. I let a little bit of the dark liquid slosh over the rim and stain the white tablecloth. "Oops," I mumbled, dabbing at it ineffectually with a napkin. "Look at that. Clumsy, just clumsy." Loretta reached over and patted my hand. Her touch was cold and patronizing. "Do not worry about it, Elijah," she cooed, her voice dripping with that sickening fake sweetness. "It is just a spill. You have been having a lot of those lately, haven't you?" I looked up at her, blinking rapidly as if trying to focus through a fog. "Have I, Loretta? I suppose I have. My mind, it just wanders off sometimes, like a dog off a leash." Across the table, Gavin was not eating. He was watching me with the intensity of a predator waiting for the wounded gazelle to finally collapse. He was tapping his foot nervously, a staccato rhythm that betrayed his desperation. He had the folder of documents sitting next to his plate. It was a thick blue folder, the kind lawyers use to bury the truth in fine print. "So, Dad," Gavin said, leaning forward. "About our conversation yesterday. The investment." I frowned, looking confused. "Investment? Did we talk about an investment, son?" Gavin exchanged a panicked look with Loretta. The fear in his eyes was delicious. He was terrified that my dementia had wiped out his payday. "Yes," Elijah, Loretta jumped in, her voice rising an octave. "The land. The land in Mississippi. You agreed to sell it to Gavin's company, remember? To secure our future." "Oh," I said slowly, the light of recognition dawning on my face. "The farm." "Yes, Granddaddy's farm. The pecans." "Right," Gavin said, opening the folder and sliding it across the polished wood table. "I have the papers right here. My legal team worked all night to get them ready for the chairman. They are standard transfer documents. Very simple." I put on my reading glasses, but I let them sit crooked on my nose. I picked up the first page. The letters were small, dense, and intentionally confusing. I knew exactly what this was. Saul had warned me. This wasn't just a sale of land. Buried in paragraph 42 clause B was likely a stipulation that granted power of attorney over all ancillary assets connected to the seller. They were not just trying to take the farm, they were trying to take everything. The house, the pension, the accounts. This is a lot of words, Gavin, I muttered, flipping the page with a shaking finger. I do not see the part about the pecans. It is all there, Dad Gavin said, handing me a pen. A Mont Blanc. Expensive. Probably bought with my money. Just sign at the X tags. The chairman is waiting for the confirmation. We need to wire the funds today or the deal falls through. I held the pen, hovering over the paper. My hand shook violently. I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the hardwood floor and rolled under the table. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Tasha snapped. She had been sitting in the corner, scrolling through her phone, probably shopping for the things she would buy once the ink was dry. "I will get it! I will get it!" I stammered, pushing my chair back. I bent down, groaning as I reached under the table. This was the moment. The tablecloth hung low, creating a curtain between me and them. In the split second that I was out of their sight, I reached into the hidden pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a folded set of documents that Saul had prepared for me at 4 a.m. They were identical in paperweight, identical in font, and they were folded exactly like the ones on the table. I grabbed the pen with one hand, and with the other, I performed the switch. I slid Gavin's predatory contract into my sock and palmed Saul's trap. It was a move I had learned from a card shark in Memphis back in '68. They say you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, but you can certainly remind him of the old ones. I groaned again, bumping my head on the table for effect as I straightened up. I placed the new stack of papers on the table, smoothing them out with my trembling hands. "Found it," I said, holding up the pen triumphantly. "Good," Gavin said, exhaling a breath he must have been holding for a minute. "Now just sign here, and here, and here." He did not even look at the papers. Why would he? He saw an old man fumble and recover. He was too focused on the finish line to check the track. I brought the pen to the paper. I hesitated. "Loretta," I said, looking at my wife, "are you sure this is the right thing to do? My father, he always said land is the only thing that lasts." Loretta's eyes hardened. "Do it, Elijah. Do it for us. Do it for Tasha. Do you want us to struggle when you are gone?" Struggle. The woman was wearing diamond earrings at breakfast. "Okay," I whispered. "For Tasha." I signed. My signature was shaky but legible. Elijah J. Vance. I signed the first page, then the second, then the third. With every scratch of the pen, I could feel the tension in the room release. Gavin was practically vibrating. Tasha had put her phone down and was watching with a greedy smirk. "There," I said, capping the pen. "It is done." Gavin snatched the papers before the ink was even dry. He did not check them. He did not read a single word. He shoved them into the blue folder and clutched it to his chest like a winning lottery ticket. "You made the right choice, Dad," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "You have no idea how huge this is." I smiled a weak, senile smile. "I hope so, son. I hope the chairman is happy." "Oh, he will be," Gavin said, standing up. "He will be thrilled. I have to go. I have to get this to the notary and then to the bank." He kissed Loretta on the cheek. He did not kiss me. He did not even shake my hand. He just turned and practically ran for the door, his coattails flapping behind him. Tasha followed him. "Bye, Daddy," she called out over her shoulder, not even looking back. "Thanks for the inheritance." The front door slammed shut. Loretta stood up, letting out a long sigh. "Well, that is settled," she said. "I am going to the spa, Elijah. My nerves are shot. You should take a nap. You look tired." She patted my shoulder again and walked out, leaving me alone in the dining room. I waited. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway. I waited until the silence of the house returned heavy and absolute. Then I stopped trembling. I sat up straight. I took the napkin and wiped the spilled coffee from the table with a firm, steady hand. I reached down into my sock and pulled out the original documents Gavin had given me. I looked at them. Just as I suspected. A total transfer of assets, a robbery in broad daylight disguised as a business deal. I picked up my lighter from the sideboard. I held the flame to the corner of Gavin's papers and watched them curl into black ash in the empty saucer. Then I poured myself a fresh cup of tea. Earl Grey. I took a sip, savoring the bergamot. Gavin was running to the bank right now. He was going to hand those papers to a notary who was, unbeknownst to him, already briefed by Saul. He thought he had a deed to 40 acres of prime Mississippi soil and power of attorney over my accounts. But what he actually had in that folder was a signed assumption of liability agreement. By countersigning the document, which he did blindly thinking he was witnessing my signature, he had legally agreed to assume personal responsibility for the outstanding tax liens I had fictitiously placed on the property through a shell entity Saul created. And the second document, the reverse mortgage authorization. I had not transferred the land to him. I had transferred the land's debt to him. I had signed the property into a complex trust that stripped it of all equity, essentially locking it down for 99 years, while assigning the cost of its maintenance and the massive early withdrawal penalties to the holder of the contract. Gavin. By the time he realized what he had done, the bank would have already processed the filing. He had just voluntarily anchored himself to a sinking ship. He had gone in looking for $500,000 in liquidity and walked out with $500,000 in instant debt. I took another sip of tea and looked out the window. A squirrel was bearing a nut in the garden. Always read the fine print, son, I said to the empty room. And never assume the old lion has lost his teeth just because he is lying down. My phone buzzed. It was Saul. The eagle has landed. He is at the bank. He just handed the folder to the clerk. The trap is sprung. I smiled. Now we wait for the scream. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I needed to start preparing dinner. I had a feeling Loretta would be home early tonight, and she would not be in the mood for spa treatments. She would be in the mood for answers, and I would have them ready, along with a very nice slice of humble pie. I checked my watch. 10 in the morning. By noon, Gavin's world would start to crumble. By dinner time, he would be begging, but the charity window was closed. The ghost investor had just made his first withdrawal, and the penalty fees were going to be hell. The champagne cork popped with a sound like a gunshot echoing off the high ceilings of the living room. It was the sound of victory, or at least what Gavin thought was victory. He marched into the house waving a letter from Meridian Trust Bank like it was a flag of conquest. His face was flushed with adrenaline and expensive scotch. $5 million, he shouted, spinning around in the foyer. $5 million liquid cash. They approved it on the spot, Elijah. On the spot. I sat in my armchair turning the page of a newspaper I was not actually reading. I looked up over my spectacles. That is a lot of money, Gavin. I said, my voice calm. I assumed the chairman was satisfied with the land papers. Satisfied, Gavin laughed, pouring himself a drink from my crystal decanter. He was ecstatic. He said the property valuation in Mississippi was the perfect collateral. He leveraged it against the company projection. We are fully funded for the Chicago Gala. This is going to be the event of the decade, Dad. We are booking the grand ballroom at the Ritz. I watched him drink. He had no idea. The bank had not approved the loan because of the land value. The land was sitting in a trust that prohibited commercial development. The bank had approved the loan because the assumption of liability document he signed attached his personal credit and his future earnings to a high-interest predatory bridge loan. He hadn't secured capital. He had just put a $5 million noose around his neck. But I just smiled. That is wonderful, son. I am glad I could help. Just then, Tasha walked in. She was not smiling. She was holding a clipboard and looking around the living room with critical eyes. She was in full event planner mode, which meant she was stressed, irritable, and looking for a target. Gavin, she snapped. We have a problem. The VIP list just expanded. We have investors coming in from Dubai and London. The Ritz is fully booked for suites. We need to host the platinum tier guests here. Here, Gavin asked, looking around. In this house. Yes, here, Tasha said. It is a brownstone in the Gold Coast. It has character. But we need rooms. We need the master suite. She turned her eyes toward me. Cold, calculating eyes. Daddy, she said, we need your room. I lowered the newspaper slowly. My room. The room I had shared with her mother for 30 years. The room where I recovered from my knee surgery. The room where I kept the urn of my first dog. You want me to move out of my bedroom, I asked. Just for a week, Tasha said, waving her hand dismissively. Look, we need the space. The investors expect luxury. And to be honest, Daddy, the room smells. It smells, I repeated. Yes, Tasha said, wrinkling her nose. It smells like... I do not know. Old people. And machine oil. It smells like that grease you used to bring home on your work clothes when I was a kid. It permeates the curtains. It is not the vibe we are going for with Gavin Tech. Machine oil. I haven't worked on a loading dock in 15 years. I shower twice a day with expensive soap. The smell wasn't on my skin. It was in her mind. She looked at me and she didn't see a father or a provider. She saw a mechanic, a laborer, someone beneath her new station in life. I looked at Loretta. My wife was standing by the window arranging flowers. She heard every word. "Loretta," I said softly, "you hear this? She wants to put me out of our room." Loretta did not turn around. She kept arranging the lilies, the same lilies she pretended to buy for her mother's funeral. "It makes sense, Elijah," she said, her voice tight. "It is just for the business. We have to support Gavin. You can sleep in the guest room. The guest room is full," Tasha interrupted. "I put the stylists in there, and the study is full of gift bags." Then where I asked, "Where do you suggest I sleep in my own house?" Tasha pointed downward. "The basement," she said. "It is finished right. It has a bathroom. It is quiet. You like it down there. You have your little workbench and your old records. It will be like a vacation for you." The basement. They were banishing me to the underground. Like a piece of broken furniture they didn't want the guests to see. "Fine," I said, standing up. My knees popped. I grabbed my cane. "If my scent offends your guests, Tasha, I will remove myself." I walked past Gavin. He didn't even look up from his phone. He was too busy spending the $5 million he didn't actually have. I walked past Loretta. She finally turned to look at me. There was a flicker of shame in her eyes, but she blinked it away. Greed is a powerful anesthetic. I packed a small bag. I took my toothbrush, my medications, and the photo of my parents. I walked down the narrow wooden stairs to the basement. The air down here was cool and smelled of cedar and concrete. It was quiet. This was my sanctuary. This was where I escaped when the noise of their ungratefulness became too loud. Tasha was right about one thing. I did have a workbench down here. It was an old heavy table made of oak stained with oil and grease from years of tinkering. I ran my hand over the rough wood. They thought this was a symbol of my low status. They didn't understand that this workbench was where I built the discipline that made me a millionaire. I walked past the workbench to the far wall where I kept my old tool chest. A red metal box chipped and scratched. To Tasha, it was just junk. I pulled the tool chest away from the wall. Behind it was a small panel in the concrete. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner I had installed 10 years ago. The panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a heavy steel safe. Loretta didn't know about this safe. She thought my money was in the joint checking account and the pension fund she had already drained. She didn't know about the accounts I opened in the 80s. You see, back when I was managing logistics for the steel mills, I noticed something. The men in suits who owned the companies didn't work half as hard as we did, but they got richer every year. So I started reading. I read the Wall Street Journal on my lunch breaks while the other guys played cards. I learned about compound interest. I learned about dividends. Every paycheck I took 20%, and I bought stocks. I bought into the shipping companies I worked for. I bought into the tech companies that started automating our jobs. When the world changed, I didn't get left behind. I bought a piece of the future. I dialed the combination. Left, right, left. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. Cash is for amateurs. Cash burns. Inside were stacks of certificates, bond deeds, and verified shareholder statements. I pulled out a thick leather binder. I opened it to the section marked Banking Sector. I ran my finger down the list until I found it. Meridian Trust Bank. I wasn't just a customer at Meridian Trust. I was an institutional investor. I had been buying their stock since they were a regional lender in the 90s. Through reinvested dividends and stock splits, I currently held a voting interest that allowed me to have a direct line to the board of directors. I looked at the statement. My name, Elijah J. Vance, was printed at the top. Next to it was a number that would have made Gavin faint. I pulled out my burner phone. The one only Saul had the number to. I dialed a number I had memorized. "Reception. This is the office of the CEO," a woman answered. "Connect me to Sterling," I said, my voice dropping the shaky old man act. "This is Vance. Shareholder ID 77 Alpha Bravo." There was a pause, then a click, then a booming voice. "Elijah, is that you? I haven't heard from you since the shareholder meeting in Geneva." "Hello, Sterling," I said, leaning back against my workbench. "I am calling about a loan you just approved, a commercial bridge loan for a company called Blue Horizon Holdings, $5 million. I could hear typing on the other end. "Yes, here it is," Sterling said. "High risk, high yield. The collateral is a bit complex, a reverse mortgage liability structure, but the borrower accepted full personal recourse. We love these deals, Elijah. If they default, we own them for life. Why do you ask?" "I want you to fast-track the disbursement," I said. "Give him the money today." Sterling laughed. "Usually you call to warn me about bad risk. You want me to give this guy $5 million. He looks like a liability on paper." "He is," I said, looking up at the ceiling where I could hear Tasha walking around in her high heels. "He is a massive liability, but I want him to feel rich, Sterling. I want him to spend every dime. I want him to dig the hole so deep that he can never climb out." "I see," Sterling said, his voice lowering. "Is this personal, Elijah?" "He is living in my house," I said. "He is sleeping in my bedroom, and he just told me I smell like a laborer." "Say no more," Sterling said. "The wire is being processed as we speak. But Elijah, when the default happens, I interrupted. "You do not send the debt collectors to him. You sell the debt to me. I want to own the paper on his life." "Done," Sterling said. "A pleasure doing business with you, Elijah." I hung up. I sat there in the silence of the basement. Upstairs, they were preparing for a party. They were moving my clothes out of the closet to make room for strangers. They were laughing at the old mechanic in the cellar. Let them laugh. I looked at the stock certificates. I was the majority shareholder of their destruction. I put the binder back in the safe and locked it. I pushed the tool chest back in place. Then I laid down on the small cot in the corner. It was hard and uncomfortable, but I slept better than I had in weeks, because I knew something they didn't. The machine oil they hated so much. It was the only thing keeping the gears of their lives turning, and I had just decided to shut off the engine. Tomorrow the VIPs would arrive, and the ghost investor would be there to serve them drinks and watch the show. The final act was about to begin. They dressed me in denim overalls that were 2 sizes too big. My daughter Tasha said it added to the rustic aesthetic she was trying to curate for the evening. She wanted me to look like an authentic part of the scenery, like a garden gnome or a hired hand who came with the property. I stood by the rose bushes holding a pair of shears clipping away dead leaves while catering staff set up tables covered in white linen on my own patio. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was the house I had bought with the proceeds from the sale of my first logistics firm in 1998. I had planted these roses myself for Loretta on our 40th anniversary. Now I was being forced to tend them like a servant, while my family prepared to entertain men who likely had never calloused their hands in their entire lives. Gavin was in rare form. He was wearing a tuxedo that shone a little too brightly under the string lights. He was pacing back and forth, checking his watch, barking orders at the waiters. He was nervous. Tonight was the pre-launch dinner. He had invited the platinum investors, the heavy hitters who were supposed to bankroll his global expansion. He needed them to believe he was a titan of industry. He needed them to believe this lifestyle was his birthright and not something he had stolen from a retired old man he currently had working in the dirt. The cars began to arrive around 7. Bentleys. Mercedes Maybachs. The kind of cars that glide rather than drive. I kept my head down, focusing on the thorns of the roses. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a sniper waiting for the target to walk into the crosshairs. Gavin greeted them with that wide, practiced smile of his. He laughed too loud. He shook hands too vigorously. He was trying so hard to project power that he reeked of desperation. Among the guests was a man I recognized immediately, Frederick Thorne. Frederick was old money, real money. He owned a shipping conglomerate that moved cargo across 3 oceans. I had not seen him in 10 years, not since we sat across a negotiation table during the port strikes in Baltimore. He had grayed a bit, and he walked with a slight limp, but his eyes were still as sharp as a hawk's. I watched from the shadows as Gavin led Frederick to the head of the table. "Mr. Thorne, it is an honor," Gavin gushed, pouring the wine himself. "An absolute honor. I have admired your business model for years." Frederick sat down, looking around the patio with a critical eye. He took the glass of wine but didn't drink it. He just held it up to the light. "Nice place you have here, Gavin," Frederick said, his voice gravelly and deep. A bit historic for a tech mogul, isn't it? Gavin laughed. Well, you know I appreciate the classics. Roots, heritage, that sort of thing. Roots. The man was ready to sell my ancestors' farm for crypto coins, but now he was talking about heritage. I moved closer. Tasha had instructed me to stay visible but silent. She wanted me to be the charming old gardener, a prop to show how benevolent they were employing the elderly. I stepped onto the patio with a basket of cut flowers. I walked past the table, keeping my head bowed. Frederick's eyes followed me. He stopped swirling his wine. He leaned forward, squinting through the dim light. "Wait a minute," Frederick said, raising a hand. Gavin froze. "What is it, Mr. Thorne?" "That man," Frederick said, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I know that walk, the way he carries his shoulders." Frederick stood up, pushing his chair back. He walked toward me. I stopped. I did not run. I stood my ground, clutching the basket. Frederick stopped 3 feet away from me. He looked into my face, studying the lines, the gray stubble, the tired eyes I was projecting. "Vance," he whispered. "Elijah Vance." The table went silent. Gavin rushed over, placing a hand on Frederick's shoulder, trying to steer him away. "Oh, I am so sorry, Mr. Thorne," Gavin said, letting out a nervous chuckle. "You have to excuse him. That is just my father-in-law. He is not all there anymore." Frederick didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on mine. "Not all there," Frederick repeated. "Tragic, really?" Gavin continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Early onset dementia. He thinks he works here. We let him putter around the garden to keep him happy. Sometimes he thinks he is a truck driver. Sometimes he thinks he is the president. We just play along. It is a kindness, really." Tasha chimed in from the table, sipping her cocktail. "Yes, it is so hard on us, but we promise to take care of him, even when he gets confused and thinks he knows important people." The other guests nodded sympathetically. What saints Gavin and Tasha were taking care of the senile old man. Frederick looked at Gavin, then back at me. He looked confused. He remembered Elijah Vance as the man who could calculate shipping tonnage in his head faster than a computer. He remembered the man who stared down union bosses without blinking. The image of me in oversized overalls didn't fit. Elijah, Frederick asked softly, "Is that true? Do you know who I am?" This was the moment. I could have shouted. I could have dropped the basket and told everyone that I owned the deed to the house and that Gavin was a fraud. But that would have been messy. That would have been emotional. And business is never emotional. I let my jaw hang loose. I blinked vacantly. I let out a wheezing laugh like a man whose mind was floating in the clouds. "Pretty flowers," I mumbled, holding out a rose. "For the lady." Gavin sighed dramatically. "See, he is gone. Completely gone. Come sit down, Frederick. Let's talk about the future." Gavin turned his back to lead Frederick away. In that split second, as Frederick turned to follow, I stepped forward. I reached out and brushed a piece of lint off Frederick's expensive suit jacket. And as I did, I leaned in close. So close that my breath tickled his ear. I dropped the senile accent. I dropped the wheeze. I spoke in the clear baritone voice that Frederick had heard across the negotiation table a decade ago. I whispered 7 words. "Check the collateral on the bridge loan." Frederick stiffened. His spine went rigid as if he had been touched by a live wire. He stopped walking. He turned his head slowly to look at me. I was back to being the gardener. I was smiling goofily, examining a leaf. But my eyes met his for 1 second. And in that second, I gave him a wink. A cold, hard wink. Frederick Thorne was a billionaire because he wasn't stupid. He knew what a bridge loan was. He knew what collateral was. And he knew that a senile man doesn't use those words. He looked at Gavin. But this time, he didn't see a young prodigy. He saw a dead man walking. He saw a fool who was trying to hustle a shark. Frederick's face changed. The respect vanished. It was replaced by a look of profound pity. Not for me, but for the boy in the tuxedo who had no idea he was already in the grave. "Are you coming, Frederick?" Gavin asked, oblivious. Frederick cleared his throat. He looked at his watch. "Actually, Gavin," he said, his tone icy. "I just remembered I have a conference call with Tokyo, an urgent matter regarding collateral." Gavin's face fell. "But we haven't even served the appetizers." "I'm afraid I have to go," Frederick said. He didn't shake Gavin's hand. He walked past him. As he passed me, he didn't say a word. He just nodded. A barely perceptible nod of respect, one general acknowledging another on the battlefield. He walked out the side gate, his security detail trailing behind him. The other guests exchanged awkward glances. When the whale leaves the swimming pool, the other fish get nervous. One by one, they started checking their phones. They started making excuses. Babysitters, early flights, stomach aches. Within 20 minutes, the patio was empty. The catering staff stood around confused, holding trays of filet mignon that no one wanted. Gavin stood in the middle of the empty party, his hands clenching and unclenching. He was vibrating with rage. His big night, his $5 million launch, ruined. He turned slowly to look at me. I was still standing by the roses, humming a little tune to myself, clipping a dead branch. "You," Gavin hissed. He marched over to me. He kicked the basket of flowers, sending petals scattering across the patio. "What did you do?" he screamed. "What did you say to him?" I jumped back, feigning terror. I dropped the shears. "Me," I stammered. "I didn't say nothing. I just gave him a flower. He was a nice man. He reminded me of the mailman." "The mailman," Gavin roared. "That was Frederick Thorne, you senile old bat. He is worth $4 billion, and he just walked out because of you. Because you smell like manure and you look like a hobo." He raised his hand as if to strike me. I flinched, putting my hands up. "Please don't hit me, Gavin. I will be good." Tasha ran over, grabbing his arm. "Gavin, stop. The neighbors will see." He lowered his hand, but his eyes were murderous. "Get him out of here," Tasha, Gavin spat. "Get him back in the basement. If I see his face again tonight, I swear to God I will put him in a home tomorrow morning. A state home. The cheap one." "I am sorry, Daddy," Tasha said, shoving me toward the door. "You ruined everything. Just go downstairs." I shuffled away. My head hung low. I walked into the house down the hall and opened the door to the basement stairs. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, I straightened up. I rolled my shoulders back. I dusted the dirt off my overalls. I walked down the stairs into the cool quiet of my sanctuary. I sat on the edge of my cot and pulled out my phone. I sent a text to Saul. "Thorne is out. The dominoes are falling." I could hear Gavin upstairs throwing glasses against the wall. He was screaming at Loretta. He was blaming the catering. He was blaming the weather. He didn't know that the whisper had already traveled. By morning, everyone in the financial district would know that Gavin's collateral was toxic. Frederick Thorne didn't gossip, but he warned his friends. I lay back on the pillow and closed my eyes. Tonight I was the gardener. I pruned the dead weight, and tomorrow I would pull the weeds up by the root. The dinner was a disaster, but for me it was the most delicious meal I had eaten in years. Revenge. It turns out is best served with a side of panic. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago smells different than the rest of the world. It smells of old money and fresh orchids. It smells of ambition and fear masked by expensive cologne. Tonight, it was packed to capacity with over 500 guests. There were venture capitalists from New York tech moguls from Silicon Valley and curious onlookers from the Chicago elite who wanted to see what the buzz was all about. I stood in the back of the room near the heavy velvet curtains that covered the service entrance. I was wearing my best tuxedo, the one I bought in London 30 years ago. It still fit perfectly. I had shaved my gray stubble and polished my shoes until they shone like obsidian. Tonight I was not the gardener. I was not the confused old man. Tonight I was the executioner. My daughter Tasha was running around the front of the room like a headless chicken. She was snapping at the waitstaff, adjusting floral arrangements and making sure the lighting was perfect for the cameras. She looked beautiful, I will give her that. But it was a hollow beauty. It was the beauty of a poisonous flower that blooms only to trap its prey. Loretta sat in the front row. She was wearing a diamond necklace that I recognized immediately. It was the one I had bought her for our 25th anniversary. She had told me she lost it 5 years ago. Seeing it around her neck while she smiled at the man who was robbing me made my stomach turn. But I did not look away. I wanted to remember every detail. The lights dimmed. A dramatic hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight cut through the darkness and landed on the center of the stage. Music swelled. It was some modern electronic beat that sounded like a heart attack set to rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen," a booming voice announced. "Please welcome the visionary behind the revolution, the CEO of Blue Horizon and Gavin Tech, Mr. Gavin Miller." Gavin walked onto the stage like he owned the building. He was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo with black lapels. He raised his hands to the applause, soaking it in. He looked confident. He looked rich. He looked like a man who believed his own lies. "Thank you," he said, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for being here to witness history." He began to pace the stage. Behind him, a massive LED screen the size of a billboard displayed the Gavin Tech logo. It was a sleek silver design that looked expensive. For too long he continued, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. "The financial sector has been gatekept by dinosaurs, by old men in dusty boardrooms who do not understand the speed of the modern world. They tell us to be cautious. They tell us to save. They tell us that wealth is built slowly." He paused for effect. "But we know better, don't we? We know that in the digital age, wealth is not built. It is captured. It is seized by those brave enough to see the future." The crowd murmured in agreement. I saw young men in the audience nodding hungrily. They wanted to believe him. They wanted the shortcut. "Tonight," Gavin said, raising his voice, "I am proud to announce the launch of the Horizon Protocol, an algorithm that guarantees returns that the banks say are impossible. And I am proud to say that we have already secured $5 million in seed capital from a private family trust that believes in this vision." He gestured to Loretta in the front row. She beamed and waved like the Queen of England. "My wife family," he said, putting a hand over his heart. "They are good people. Simple people. But they recognized genius when they saw it. They handed me the keys to their legacy because they knew I could drive it faster and further than they ever could. Simple people." I reached into my pocket and touched the small earpiece I was wearing. Now I whispered. High above in the technical booth, a young man named Kevin pressed a single key on his laptop. Kevin was not a waiter. He was a forensic data specialist I had hired 3 days ago. He had bypassed the Hotel S system in less than 10 minutes. On stage, Gavin turned to the giant screen. "Let me show you the numbers," he shouted, pointing at the display. But the sleek silver logo did not change into a graph. It flickered. A line of static tore across the image like a scar. Gavin frowned. He clicked his clicker. Nothing happened. The screen went black for a second. The music cut out with a screech that made people cover their ears. "Technical difficulties," Gavin joked, letting out a nervous laugh. "It seems our technology is too advanced for the Ritz." A few people chuckled, but then the screen flared to life again. It was not a slide. It was a video. The image was grainy but clear. It was black and white night vision footage. The date stamp in the corner read 3 days ago. The location was unmistakable. It was my basement. The camera angle was from the hidden lens I had installed in the smoke detector above my workbench. On the screen, Gavin and Loretta were standing over my tool chest. They were holding glasses of wine. The audio crackled and then came through the massive speakers loud and clear. It echoed off the walls of the ballroom. "God, it stinks down here," Gavin's voice boomed. "It is that old man smell," Loretta's voice replied. "It is mixed with that cheap grease he uses. I cannot wait to get rid of this junk." On stage, the real Gavin froze. He lowered the microphone. He looked back at the screen, his eyes wide with horror. "Cut it," he hissed at the stage manager. "Cut the feed." But the video continued. "I cannot believe he signed it," Gavin said on the screen, taking a sip of wine. "I thought he would put up a fight about the land, but he just rolled over." "He is pathetic," Loretta said. She was laughing. "He has always been soft. He thinks hard work is the answer to everything. He does not realize that the world belongs to people like us who know how to take what we want." In the ballroom, the silence was absolute. 500 people held their breath. On the screen, Gavin leaned in closer to Loretta. "You know what the best part is?" he said. His voice was dripping with malice. "The best part is that he thinks he is investing. He thinks he is a partner." Gavin laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. "He is not a partner, Loretta. He is a milk cow. And when the milk runs out, you do not keep the cow in the living room. You send it to the slaughterhouse." Gasps rippled through the audience. I saw Frederick Thorne, sitting near the back, shake his head slowly. On stage, Gavin was waving his arms frantically. "Stop this!" he screamed. "This is a deep fake. This is AI generated. Turn it off." But the video cut to a new clip. This one was from the dining room. It was Tasha and Gavin. "He is embarrassing," Tasha said on the huge screen. Her face was distorted by a sneer. "Did you see his shoes? They looked like something a janitor would wear." "Well, that is what he is," basically, Gavin replied. "Look, Tasha, let's be real. Your dad is a diversity hire in his own life. He got lucky with the logistics boom. But people like him, they do not know how to handle real money. They just hoard it. It takes someone with my pedigree to actually use it. People like him. The racial undertone hit the room like a physical slap. The air left the room. Gavin on stage looked like he was going to vomit. He looked out at the audience. He saw faces that were closed. He saw investors standing up. He saw the illusion of the golden boy dissolving into the reality of a bigot and a thief. Security. Gavin yelled, his voice cracking. Where is security? Someone is hacking my presentation. The video cut one last time. It showed Gavin alone. He was on the phone. Yeah, Dante, he was saying. I got the signature. The old fool signed everything. Yeah, the house, the land, the pension. It is all ours. Once the loan clears, I will wire you your cut. We will put him in a state home next month, somewhere cheap. He won't know the difference. He will probably thank me for it. The video froze on Gavin's face, a face twisted with greed and contempt. The screen went black. The lights in the ballroom did not come back up immediately. For 10 seconds, the room was plunged into darkness. Then a single spotlight clicked on, but it did not land on Gavin. It landed on the back of the room. It landed on me. I stood there in my tuxedo, leaning on my cane. I did not look frail. I did not look confused. I looked like a statue carved from granite. I slowly began to walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. They stared at me with a mixture of shock and awe. I walked toward the stage. The rhythmic tap of my cane on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. Tap, tap, tap. Gavin stood on the stage, paralyzed. He looked at me approaching, and for the first time in his life, he saw the real Elijah Vance. He did not see a victim. He saw the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I stopped at the foot of the stage. I looked up at him. Technical difficulties, son, I asked, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. Or just difficult truths? Gavin stammered. Dad, Elijah, listen. That was taken out of context. That was a joke. We were just blowing off steam. I climbed the stairs to the stage. I moved slowly but deliberately. I walked over to the podium and took the microphone from his limp hand. He did not fight me. He was too broken. I turned to face the crowd. I looked at Loretta in the front row. She was weeping into her hands. Tasha was staring at the floor, refusing to look at me. I looked at the investors. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice calm and steady. I apologize for the interruption. My son-in-law promised you a look at the future. I pointed to the blank screen behind me. But the future is built on the foundation of the past, and if the foundation is rotten, the house will fall. I turned to Gavin. You wanted an angel investor, Gavin. You wanted a silent partner. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the original folder, the one with the real documents. Well, I said, dropping the folder at his feet. You got one. But angels do not just bring blessings, son. Sometimes they bring the sword. Gavin looked down at the folder. He looked back up at me. What is this? He whispered. That I said, leaning in close so the microphone picked up every syllable. That is the foreclosure notice on your life. I signaled to the back of the room. Now, Kevin. The screen flared to life again, but this time, it wasn't a video. It was a bank statement, a live feed from the Meridian Trust Bank internal server. It showed the balance of the Blue Horizon account, 0, and below it in bright red letters, status frozen, fraud investigation pending. The crowd erupted. Gavin fell to his knees, and the show was just beginning. The room was spinning for Gavin, but for me, the world had never been clearer. I stood at the podium looking out at the sea of shocked faces. The silence that followed the frozen bank account on the screen was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a building collapses. I adjusted the microphone stand, raising it up. I did not stoop. I did not tremble. I stood tall, my spine straight, my shoulders broad, the posture of a man who had carried heavy loads all his life and never broken. Gavin was still on his knees, staring at the folder I had dropped. He looked up at me, his eyes red and frantic. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, except the jar was worth millions and the punishment was not a timeout. He scrambled to his feet, lunging for the microphone. "Give me that," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is a setup. Security, get this crazy old man off the stage." I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply shifted my weight and blocked him with my arm. It was a solid, immovable barrier. He bounced off me like a rubber ball. "Sit down, son," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "The adults are talking now." The crowd gasped. They had never heard me speak like this. They only knew the stuttering, mumbling Elijah. This voice was deep. It was commanding. It was the voice of the man who had negotiated union contracts in the toughest steel mills in Detroit. Gavin stumbled back, his face pale. He looked at the audience desperately. "He is lying," Gavin shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He is senile. He does not know what he is saying. That video was fake. It was deep, fake technology. I am the victim here." I looked at him with cold pity. Then I turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "my name is Elijah Vance. For the past 3 months, I have played the role of the fool. I have let my family treat me like furniture. I have let them spend my money. I have let them mock my history." I paused, making eye contact with the investors in the front row. "But in the logistics business, we have a saying. You can dress up a crate however you want, but if the manifest is empty, you are not shipping anything but air." I kicked the blue folder on the floor toward Gavin. "My son-in-law here promised you a revolution. He promised you the Horizon Protocol. He told you it was an algorithm. He told you it was the future." I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper. I held it up to the light. But I did some digging. I hired a forensic accountant. And do you know what the Horizon Protocol actually is? The room was deathly quiet. Even the waiters had stopped moving. "It is a Ponzi scheme," I said, letting the words hang in the air. Murmurs of anger ripple through the room. Gavin shook his head violently. No, that is a lie. It is a classic pyramid structure," I continued, ignoring him. "He takes money from investor A to pay the interest for investor B, and he skims 40% off the top for himself, for his cars, for his parties, for the champagne you are drinking right now." I looked at the glass in a woman's hand in the front row. She slowly set it down on the table, looking disgusted. "But he needed a big injection of capital to keep the pyramid from collapsing," I said. "He needed a whale. And he thought he found one in a senile old man who owned 40 acres of land in Mississippi." I looked down at Gavin. "He told you that land was the collateral for his bridge loan. He told the bank that land was worth $500,000 and could be developed into a strip mall." Gavin's eyes darted around the room. He was looking for an exit. But the doors were blocked by large men in dark suits who had quietly entered while I was speaking. "Well, I have news for you," I said, "and I have news for the bank." I unfolded the paper in my hand. "This is the deed to that land," I said. "My great-grandfather bought it with money he earned picking cotton. It is sacred ground. And 3 years ago, when I first suspected that my family loved my wallet more than they loved me, I transferred that land into a trust. I turned the paper so the camera could zoom in on it. The image appeared on the giant screen, replacing the frozen bank account. 'The Vance Charity Trust for Orphans,' I read aloud. The crowd erupted in whispers. "That is right," I said. "That land does not belong to me. It does not belong to Gavin. It belongs to the children of Chicago who have no parents. It is a nature preserve. It cannot be sold. It cannot be developed. And it certainly cannot be used as collateral for a high-risk loan to fund a criminal enterprise." Gavin looked at the screen. His mouth fell open. "You signed it," he whispered. "I saw you sign it." "I signed a transfer of liability," I corrected him, leaning down so only he could hear. "I signed the debt over to you, Gavin. But the asset?" "The asset was never on the table." I stood back up, addressing the room. "So the $5 million that Meridian Trust Bank wired to him this morning," I said. "It is an unsecured loan. It is based on a fraudulent asset." I looked toward the back of the room. "Isn't that right, Mr. Sterling?" A tall man with silver hair stood up from table 9. It was Sterling, the CEO of Meridian Trust. I had invited him personally. He looked furious, but not at me. He was looking at Gavin. "That is correct, Mr. Vance," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Meridian Trust has a zero-tolerance policy for fraud. Upon reviewing the documents provided by Mr. Vance's legal team 10 minutes ago, we have invoked the immediate recall clause." Sterling pulled out his phone and spoke into it. "Execute the clawback," he said. On the giant screen behind me, the numbers changed again. The zero balance turned into a negative number. A massive red negative $5 million. "And one more thing," Sterling added, walking toward the stage. Since Mr. Miller signed a personal guarantee of liability and the collateral is void, the bank is moving to seize all personal assets to recover the funds, the cars, the accounts, and any property listed in his name. Gavin fell back onto his butt. He was hyperventilating. "My house," he gasped. "My car. Your leased car," Sterling corrected him. "And your rented life." But we were not done. The doors to the ballroom burst open. The crowd turned. 4 officers in uniform and 2 detectives in plain clothes marched into the room. They were not smiling. They moved with the grim efficiency of men who had a job to do. "Gavin Miller," one of the detectives shouted. Gavin scrambled backward, crab walking across the stage. No. This is a mistake. My father-in-law is confused. He is crazy." The detective climbed the stairs to the stage. He did not look at me. He walked straight to Gavin and pulled him up by his lapels. "Gavin Miller, you are under arrest," the detective said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The metal glinted under the stage lights. "For what?" Gavin shrieked, struggling. "I am a businessman. I am an innovator." "For wire fraud," the detective listed, pushing Gavin against the podium. "For bank fraud. For forgery of legal documents. And for the embezzlement of funds from a senior citizen." The detective spun Gavin around and slapped the cuffs on his wrists. Click, click. The sound echoed through the ballroom. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Better than any symphony. Better than any jazz record. It was the sound of justice. Loretta screamed. It was a high, piercing wail from the front row. She tried to run toward the stage, but her high heels caught in the carpet and she stumbled. "Gavin," she cried. Tell them it is a misunderstanding." Gavin looked at her. His eyes were wild. He spat at her. "This is your fault. You told me he was stupid. You told me he wouldn't notice. You greedy witch." Loretta froze. The crowd gasped again. The perfect family facade had shattered completely, leaving only the ugly shards of hatred. Tasha was standing by the emergency exit. She looked at her husband in handcuffs. She looked at her mother on the floor. And then she looked at me. She saw the man standing center stage, the man in the tuxedo, the man who had outsmarted them all. She did not run to help her husband. She did not run to comfort her mother. She turned around and pushed through the door, disappearing into the kitchen. Always the survivor. Always looking out for number one. The police began to drag Gavin off the stage. He was kicking and screaming. "Elijah," he begged, looking back at me. "Dad, help me. You cannot let them take me. I am family." I watched him go. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold, hollow resolve. "I am sorry, Gavin," I said into the microphone one last time. The room went silent to hear my final words to him. "I do not have a son named Gavin," I said, "and I do not bail out strangers." The detectives hauled him away. The heavy double doors swung shut behind them, cutting off his screams. I stood alone on the stage. The spotlight was hot on my face. I looked out at the 500 guests. They were staring at me, waiting to see what I would do next. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I put them on slowly. I looked at Sterling, who was standing by the stage. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I believe we have some business to discuss regarding the restructuring of that debt." Sterling nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Indeed we do, Mr. Vance." I turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I apologize for the theatrical nature of this evening, but sometimes the truth requires a spotlight." I gestured to the waiters who were standing frozen with trays of champagne. "Please," I said, "enjoy the food. The shrimp is excellent. I paid for it after all." A nervous laughter rippled through the room. "But if you are looking for the future of technology," I continued, walking toward the stairs, "I suggest you look elsewhere, because the only thing being launched here tonight is a criminal investigation." I walked down the stairs. I walked past Loretta, who was still sitting on the floor, weeping. She reached out a hand to grab my pant leg. "Elijah," she sobbed, "please." I didn't know. He tricked me too. I stopped. I looked down at her. The woman I had loved for 40 years. The woman who had laughed about putting me in a basement. "Get up, Loretta," I said softly. "You are wrinkling your dress. And you are going to need to sell it tomorrow. You are going to need the money for a lawyer." I stepped over her. I did not look back. I walked up the center aisle, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor. The crowd parted again, but this time there was no shock in their eyes. There was respect. There was fear. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cool air of the Chicago night. I took a deep breath. It tasted like freedom. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Saul. "It is done. The locks on the house have been changed. Your things are being moved back to the master bedroom, and I found a very nice apartment for Loretta. It is a studio, in the basement of a building in the South Side." I smiled. The ghost investor had closed his position, and the returns were spectacular. I hailed a taxi. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "Take me to the jazz club on Green Street," I said, leaning back in the seat. "I feel like listening to some blues, and maybe buying a round for the house. Because tonight Elijah Vance was not just surviving, he was living. And for the first time in a long time, he was the one calling the tune." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight is distinct. It is a cold mechanical sound like a lock clicking shut on a heavy steel door. In the silence of that ballroom, it sounded like a thunderclap. Gavin Miller, the man who had stood on that stage 5 minutes ago proclaiming himself the king of the future, was now bent over the podium with his face pressed against the fake wood grain. His arms were twisted behind his back at an angle that made him wince. The midnight blue tuxedo jacket he was so proud of was bunched up around his shoulders, revealing the sweat stains underneath. He was not going quietly. The confident CEO mask had completely disintegrated, leaving behind a terrified child. He was thrashing against the grip of the two detectives, kicking his expensive Italian leather shoes against the stage floor. "Get off me!" he screamed, his voice high and shrill. "You are making a mistake. I have rights. I want my lawyer. Call my lawyer." The detective who had cuffed him just tightened his grip. "You can call your lawyer from the precinct, Mr. Miller. Right now you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." But Gavin did not use it. Panic is a powerful truth serum, and Gavin was overdosing on it. He realized in that moment that there was no way out. The bank had pulled the funds. The police had the evidence. The investors had seen the video. His life as he knew it was over, and like a drowning man, he was looking for someone, anyone, to stand on, so he could take one last breath. His wild eyes scanned the room and landed on the front row. They landed on Loretta, on... My wife sat on the floor where she had fallen. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivulets. She looked small and broken, clutching her diamond necklace as if it could protect her from the reality crashing down around her. She looked up at Gavin with eyes full of confusion and desperation, waiting for him to tell her it was a misunderstanding, waiting for him to fix it. But Gavin did not fix it. He pointed a shaking finger at her as best he could while being restrained. It was her he shrieked. It was all her idea. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath from 500 people. Loretta froze. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. "She is the one who told me he was senile," Gavin yelled, spitting as he spoke. "She told me the old man was dying. She said he had months to live. She said we just needed to accelerate the inheritance because he was too stupid to manage his own money." "Gavin. Gavin! What are you saying?" Loretta whispered, her voice trembling. "Do not look at me, you old witch," Gavin screamed. "You set me up. You told me he signed the power of attorney. You said he did not read the papers. I did not know it was a trust. I trusted you. You are the one who wanted the house. You are the one who wanted the lifestyle." He turned to the detective, pleading, "Officer, look at her. She is the mastermind. I am just a businessman. She manipulated me. She hates him. She has been stealing from him for years. Check her accounts. She is the criminal here, not me." I watched from the stage. I watched the woman I had been married to for 40 years get thrown to the wolves by the man she had championed. It was a brutal sight. Loretta looked like she had been physically struck. The color drained from her face, leaving it gray and ashy. She had betrayed her husband for this man. She had lied for him. She had stolen for him. And at the first sign of trouble, he did not just abandon her. He tried to bury her to save his own skin. Loretta looked at me. Her eyes were wide with shock. She finally understood. She finally saw Gavin for what he was, a parasite, and she finally saw herself for what she was, the host he had fed on until he was caught. The detective ignored Gavin's ranting and began to drag him toward the stairs. "Move it," the officer said roughly. As they hauled him past the front row, Tasha emerged from the side of the stage. My daughter, the survivor. She had been hiding in the wings, watching the ship go down, but seeing her husband in handcuffs triggered something in her. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear of losing her status. Or maybe it was just the instinct to protect her investment. She ran toward the stairs, intercepting the officers. She threw herself at Gavin, grabbing his arm. "Stop!" she screamed. "You cannot take him. He is the CEO. This is all a misunderstanding. Daddy, tell them." She looked up at me. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were sharp. She was calculating. She knew I was the only one with the power to stop this. I was the victim. If I dropped the charges, if I told the police it was a family dispute, maybe they would let him go. "Daddy, please," Tasha cried, running up the stairs and grabbing my leg. She fell to her knees, ruining her designer dress on the dirty stage floor. "Daddy, you have to stop this. Look at him. He is terrified. He is family. He is my husband. You cannot let them take him to jail. Think about the family reputation. Think about me." I looked down at her. I looked at the top of her head, the hair perfectly styled in a salon I paid for. I felt the grip of her hands on my trousers, the same hands that had signed checks from my account without asking. I motioned for the detectives to pause. They stopped holding Gavin on the third step. Gavin looked up at me, hope flaring in his eyes. "See, he is going to stop it." Gavin panted. "Tell them, Elijah. Tell them we can work this out. I will pay you back. I swear. Just tell them to let me go." The room went silent again. Everyone was watching the father and the daughter, the patriarch and the prodigal child. I reached down and gently removed Tasha S.'s hands from my leg. I took a step back, creating distance between us. "Your husband." I repeated, my voice calm and low, amplified by the microphone still in my hand. "Yes," Tasha sobbed, standing up and trying to grab my hand. "My husband. We are just starting our lives, Daddy. He made a mistake, but he loves me, and he respects you. We all do." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the manipulation. She was using the word family like a weapon. She was using my love for her as a shield for a criminal. "Tasha," I said, "do you remember the video we just watched?" She blinked, confused. "What?" "The video," I said, pointing to the blank screen behind me. "The recording from the basement. The one where your husband was talking to his loan shark." Tasha wiped her nose. I did not hear it all. I was in the back. "Well, let me remind you what he said." I continued, my voice hardening. "He was not talking about his love for you. He was not talking about building a future with you." I looked at Gavin. He flinched. He knew what was coming. "He called you a milk cow, Tasha." Tasha froze. "What?" "He told his friend Dante Russo that you were a stupid milk cow," I said, clearly enunciating every word. "He said that once he got the money, he was going to divorce you because he was tired of your voice. He said you were useful for getting my signature, but useless for everything else." "No," Tasha whispered, shaking her head. "No, he didn't say that." "He did," I said. "And he called you a gold digger who was too dumb to dig in the right spot." I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket. "It is all on here, Tasha. Every phone call, every conversation he had when he thought no one was listening. He has a mistress in Miami, Tasha. Her name is Bella. He bought her a Porsche last week, with the money you stole from your grandmother's funeral fund." Tasha turned slowly to look at Gavin. Gavin's face was a mask of guilt. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The truth was written all over him. "It is a lie." Gavin tried to stammer, but his voice was weak. "Bella is just a consultant." Tasha stared at him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man she was begging me to save, the man she had betrayed her own father for, despised her. He had used her just like he used me. I looked back at the detectives. "Officers," I said, "please continue. I have nothing more to say to this man." "No," Gavin screamed as they yanked him down the stairs. "Elijah, wait. Tasha, baby, do not listen to him." Tasha stepped back. She watched her husband being dragged away, kicking and screaming like a toddler. She didn't move to help him this time. She stood there paralyzed by the magnitude of her own stupidity. Loretta was still on the floor, weeping softly. The sound was pathetic, a low mourning for a life that was built on sand. I adjusted my cufflinks. I felt lighter. The weight of the deception, the heavy burden of pretending not to know, was finally gone. I looked at the crowd one last time. "The show is over, folks," I said. "Drive safe." I walked down the stairs past my daughter, who was now staring at the empty doorway where her husband had disappeared. She looked at me, expecting me to comfort her, expecting me to say, "I told you so," or to offer her a hug. But I walked past her. "Daddy," she whispered. I didn't stop. "You made your choice, Tasha," I said without turning around. "You chose the milk cow. Now you have to deal with the spilled milk." I walked up the aisle, my head held high. I could feel the eyes of the city on me. They weren't looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at Elijah Vance, the man who cleaned house. As I reached the exit, Sterling met me. He held out his hand. "That was brutal, Elijah," Sterling said quietly. "It was necessary," I replied, shaking his hand. "The debt is secured," Sterling said. "We will liquidate his assets by Monday. The house in Atlanta, the cars, the accounts. It will all go to pay back the loan. He will be out of prison in maybe 5 years, but he will be bankrupt for the rest of his life." "Good," I said. "And the trust?" "Secure," Sterling confirmed. "The orphans will have their land forever." "Thank you, Sterling." I walked out into the cool night air. The wind off Lake Michigan felt good on my face. It blew away the smell of expensive perfume and cheap lies. I checked my phone. I had a text from Marcus, my old friend from the loading docks. Saw the news feed. "You got him, boss. Drinks are on me next time you are in Detroit." I smiled. I hailed a cab. "Take me home," I told the driver. "Not the brownstone. Not the house with the rose bushes and the memories of betrayal. Take me to the south side," I said, giving him the address of the small apartment I had rented 2 days ago. A place with 1 bedroom, no guest suite, and no wine cellar. A place where I could listen to my jazz records in peace. I was 71 years old. I was single. And I was free. The nightmare was over. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to waking up in the morning. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct hummed with a low headache-inducing buzz. It was a stark contrast to the crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton. The air here did not smell of orchids and champagne. It smelled of stale coffee floor wax and the cold, metallic scent of despair. I sat on a wooden bench near the front desk, my cane resting between my knees. I was not being detained. I was there as a witness, a cooperating party. I watched through the glass partition of the holding area. Loretta and Tasha were sitting on a metal bench bolted to the floor. They looked like fallen royalty. Loretta's expensive evening gown was torn at the hem and stained with dirt from when she fell on the stage. Her diamond necklace, the one she had paraded around all night, now looked garish and out of place under the harsh station lights. Tasha was shivering. She had lost one of her red-bottom shoes in the chaos and was sitting with one bare foot on the dirty linoleum. They were arguing. I could not hear the words through the glass, but I knew the rhythm. Loretta was gesturing wildly, blaming Tasha. Tasha was crying, burying her face in her hands, blaming Gavin. They were rats trapped in a bucket, turning on each other to survive. The door to the precinct opened and Saul walked in. My lawyer looked impeccable in his charcoal suit, carrying his briefcase like a weapon of war. He nodded to the desk sergeant, who seemed to know him, and then walked over to me. "Elijah," Saul said quietly. "The detectives are finishing up with Gavin. He is singing like a canary. He is trying to trade information on his loan sharks for a plea deal, but given the amount of money involved, he is not going home tonight. Or anytime soon." "What about them?" I asked, nodding toward the glass. Saul adjusted his glasses. "They are not under arrest yet, but they are about to face a judge of a different kind. The court of reality." Saul motioned to the officer, who opened the door to the waiting area. We walked in. Loretta looked up. When she saw me, hope flared in her eyes. It was pathetic, really. After everything, she still thought she could manipulate me. She still thought I was the soft touch, the husband who would fix it. "Elijah," she gasped, standing up and rushing toward me. "Oh, thank God. Tell them, Elijah. Tell them to let us go home. This place is filthy. I need my pills. I need to change." She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Tasha stood up too, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks. "Daddy, listen. Gavin, he tricked us all. We are victims too. You have to help us. We need a lawyer, a real lawyer, not a public defender." I looked at them. I looked at the women who had spent my life earnings on vanity and lies. "You have a lawyer," I said calmly, pointing to Saul. "But he does not represent you. He represents the trust." "The trust?" Loretta asked, confused. "What are you talking about?" I want to go home, Elijah. I want to go to our house. Saul stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. It was stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. Mrs. Vance, Saul said, his voice professional and cold. I am afraid that is not possible. You do not have a house to go to. Loretta laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Do not be ridiculous, Saul. I have lived in that brownstone for 30 years. My name is on the deed. It is marital property. Even if Elijah is angry, he cannot kick me out. I have rights. Saul handed her the document. Actually, Mrs. Vance, you do not. If you look at the date on this transfer, you will see that 3 years ago, shortly after Mr. Vance was hospitalized for his heart condition, and you failed to visit him for 3 days, he made some structural changes to his estate. I watched Loretta's eyes scan the paper. I saw the moment the words hit her. Irrevocable trust, she whispered, reading the title. That is correct, Saul said. 3 years ago, Elijah transferred the title of the Chicago brownstone, the Atlanta property, and the entirety of his investment portfolio into the Vance family irrevocable trust. So what Tasha snapped, stepping forward. We are family. The trust is for us. Saul shook his head. A slight smile played on his lips. The trust has very specific beneficiary designations. The primary beneficiary is Elijah Vance during his lifetime. The secondary beneficiaries are... Let me check. Saul pretended to check the paper, though he knew it by heart. Yes. The secondary beneficiaries are the United Negro College Fund and the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Loretta dropped the paper. It fluttered to the dirty floor. You mean... She stammered. I mean, Saul continued, that you are guests in those properties, revocable guests. And as the trustee, Elijah has the power to revoke guest privileges at any time for any reason, including moral turpitude and criminal conspiracy. I stepped forward, leaning on my cane. I revoked your privileges tonight, Loretta, I said softly. The locks were changed an hour ago, Saul added, checking his watch. Your personal belongings, clothes, toiletries, and personal items that were not purchased with trust funds have been packed into boxes and placed in a storage unit in Cicero. Here is the key. He tossed a small brass key onto the metal bench. It clattered loudly. Loretta stared at the key. Cicero. That was miles away. That was in the industrial district. You cannot do this, she screamed, her face twisting into ugliness. I am your wife. I am entitled to half. I will sue you. I will hire the best divorce lawyer in the city. I will take you for everything. I looked at her calmly. With what money, Loretta, I asked. With our money, she yelled. With the joint accounts. I sighed. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. I turned the screen toward her. The joint account, I said. The one you used to pay for Gavin's parties. The one you used to buy that necklace. The screen showed a balance. 0. Saul cleared his throat. The trust agreement has a clawback clause, Mrs. Vance. Any funds withdrawn by a non-beneficiary for non-approved expenses are considered a loan that is immediately callable upon evidence of misuse. Since you spent $200,000 of trust money on Gavin's fraudulent scheme, the trust has seized the remaining balance in the joint account as partial repayment. But, Tasha stammered, patting her pockets. My credit cards. I have the black card, the platinum Amex. Saul shook his head. Supplementary cards attached to the trust account, Saul explained. They were canceled at 9:00 p.m. tonight. Tasha pulled out her phone. She opened her wallet app. One by one, the digital cards on her screen turned gray. Suspended, canceled, invalid. She looked up at me, terror finally replacing the arrogance in her eyes. Daddy, she whispered, I have no money. I have $20 in my purse. I know, I said. You should probably save it. Taxi meters run high at night. This is insane, Loretta shrieked. You are leaving us on the street. Your own wife and daughter. We have nowhere to go. We have nothing. I looked at them. Really looked at them. You have your health, Loretta, I said, which is more than your parents had when you left them to die alone. She flinched as if I had slapped her. And you, Tasha, I said, turning to my daughter, you have your youth. And you have a degree I paid for. Maybe it is time you used it. I turned to walk away. Elijah, Loretta screamed, grabbing the back of my coat. You cannot leave us here. It is midnight. We are in a police station. We are wearing evening gowns. We look like freaks. I gently removed her hand from my coat. I smoothed the fabric. You looked like a queen when you were laughing at me on that video, Loretta, I said. You looked very comfortable watching your husband being humiliated. I leaned in close so only she could hear. You wanted to be independent. You wanted to be rid of the old man and his smell. Well, congratulations. You are free. I nodded to Saul. Let us go, Saul. I have a jazz record waiting for me. We walked out of the waiting room. Behind us, I heard Tasha burst into loud sobbing. I heard Loretta screaming my name, screaming that she was sorry, screaming that she loved me. But the words bounced off the glass partition. They meant nothing. They were the sounds of a predator realizing the cage door had shut. We walked out into the main lobby of the precinct. The desk sergeant looked up. Everything all right, Mr. Vance? He asked. Everything is fine, Sergeant, I said, adjusting my hat. Just clearing out some old inventory. I walked out the double doors into the cool night air. Saul walked beside me. He was quiet for a moment. Do you think they will be okay? He asked. I stopped on the sidewalk. I looked up at the city lights. They are survivors, Saul, I said. They will find a way. Loretta will sell that necklace. It might get her a month in a motel. Tasha will find a friend to crash with until she burns that bridge, too. I took a deep breath. But they will never sleep in my house again. They will never spend a dime of my labor again, and they will never make me feel small again. I hailed a taxi. You know, Saul, I said, opening the door. For 3 years I have been sleeping with one eye open. I have been watching my back in my own kitchen. And tonight, Saul asked, smiling. Tonight, I said, getting into the cab. Tonight, I am going to sleep like a baby. The taxi pulled away. I did not look back at the police station. I did not look back at the past. I watched the streetlights blur past. I was heading to the south side, to a small apartment with thin walls and cheap furniture. But it was mine. It was paid for with honest money, and it was filled with the truth. The heavy lifting was over. The logistics were settled, the shipment had been delivered, and the manifest was finally clean. The fall from the penthouse to the pavement is a long drop, but the landing is what really breaks you. For Loretta and Tasha, the landing was a basement studio apartment in Cicero, a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered, and the sirens were a constant lullaby. It was the only place they could afford with the cash from pawning Loretta's diamond earrings. The pawnbroker had given them pennies on the dollar, sensing their desperation like a shark senses blood in the water. I did not visit them, but I knew the address. Saul had arranged the lease as a final act of charity, paying the first 2 months so they would not be homeless. After that, they were on their own. The apartment was a single room with peeling beige paint that smelled of damp plaster and someone else's cigarettes. There was a kitchenette with a stove that only had one working burner, and a bathroom with a shower that dripped a rusty rhythm day and night. For 2 women who had spent the last decade complaining that a 4,000 square foot brownstone was too cramped, this 20 by 20 box was not just a home. It was a prison cell. The first night was the hardest. I know this because the neighbors complained to the landlord about the screaming. It started when Tasha tried to unpack. She had 3 suitcases of designer clothes, silk blouses, and cashmere sweaters that were now utterly useless in a drafty basement. She had nowhere to hang them. She threw a pile of clothes onto the pull-out sofa bed, the only bed in the room, and turned on her mother. "This is your fault," Tasha screamed, her voice echoing off the thin walls. "You are the one who said Daddy was weak. You are the one who said we could take him for everything. Now look at us. I am sleeping on a sofa with my mother in a basement that smells like mold." Loretta was sitting at the wobbly laminate table staring at her hands. Her manicure was chipped. The acrylic tip on her index finger had snapped off when she was dragging her suitcase down the stairs. "Do not you dare blame me," Loretta snapped back, her voice shrill with panic. "You are the one who married him. You brought that snake into our lives. You and your obsession with status. You wanted the entrepreneur. You wanted the power couple image. Well, congratulations, Tasha. You are famous now. Your husband is on every news channel in Chicago. I hate you," Tasha yelled, throwing a pillow across the room. "I hate him and I hate you. You were supposed to protect me. You are the mother. I protected you for 30 years, Loretta cried, standing up and knocking her chair over. "I gave you everything. Private schools, cars, the best clothes. I let you treat your father like a servant because I thought you were better than him. I thought we were better. And look where that got us," Tasha spat. "We are nobodies. We are worse than nobodies. We are the punchline of a joke. They spent the first week in a state of shock, eating instant noodles and waiting for a miracle that was not coming. Tasha called everyone she knew. She called her sorority sisters. She called the bridesmaids from her wedding. She called the friends she had bragged to at the brunch in Atlanta. But nobody answered. When you are rich and generous, you have 1,000 friends. When you are poor and infamous, you are a contagion. They blocked her number. They unfollowed her on social media. The circle of elites she thought she belonged to closed ranks, and she was on the outside looking in. By the second week, the reality of economics set in. The pawn shop money ran out, the electricity bill arrived, and for the first time in their lives, Loretta and Tasha had to do something they had always looked down upon. They had to look for work. Tasha went out first. She put on the most modest business suit she had left and took her resume to the corporate offices downtown. She thought her degree in communications and her experience planning events for Gavin Tech would open doors. She came home in tears. They laughed at me, she told Loretta, curling up on the sofa. The HR manager at the marketing firm, he recognized me. He asked if I had any experience with Ponzi schemes. He said they do not hire liabilities. With her name attached to the scandal, no reputable company would touch her. She was radioactive. So Tasha Vance, the girl who once complained that her sparkling water was not cold enough, walked into a discount grocery store 3 blocks away. She filled out an application with a borrowed pen. She got the job. Cashier, minimum wage, no benefits. Standing on her feet for 8 hours a day, scanning cans of beans and discount toilet paper. The first day was a lesson in humility that no textbook could teach. Tasha stood behind the register wearing a polyester smock that was too big for her. The fabric was scratchy. The fluorescent lights gave her a migraine. Her feet began to throb after 2 hours. By hour 4, her lower back was screaming. She remembered all the times she had rolled her eyes at cashiers for moving too slow. She remembered snapping at waiters for forgetting a lime. Now she was the one being snapped at. "Hurry up, lady," a customer yelled, slamming a jug of milk onto the belt. "I do not have all day. I am trying." Tasha whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to find the barcode. "It is right there." "Are you blind?" the customer sneered. "God, they will hire anyone these days." Tasha bit her lip until it tasted like copper. She wanted to scream. She wanted to say, "Do you know who I am?" But she knew who she was. She was a cashier who needed this paycheck to buy ramen noodles. While Tasha was scanning coupons, Loretta was facing her own purgatory. Loretta was 68 years old. She had not worked a day since 1985. She had no computer skills. She had no references. But the diner down the street needed a dishwasher. The industrial dishwasher had broken, and they needed hands to scrub pots until the repairman could come next week. Loretta walked into the kitchen. The heat hit her like a physical wall. It was a humid, greasy heat that smelled of old frying oil and onions. The head cook, a large man with a stained apron, looked at her manicured hands and laughed. "You sure about this, princess?" he asked. "This ain't a tea party. I need the money," Loretta said, keeping her chin up. "I am a fast learner." She was not a fast learner, but she learned. She learned that hot water burns your skin raw after 10 minutes. She learned that steel wool shreds your fingernails. She learned that standing over a sink for 6 hours makes your ankles swell to the size of grapefruits. By the lunch rush, Loretta was drowning in dirty plates. "Faster," the cook yelled, throwing a greasy pan into her sink. "We are running out of forks." Loretta scrubbed. Sweat ran down her face, ruining her makeup. Her back spasmed. She looked at the reflection in the stainless steel counter. She saw an old woman with gray roots showing in her hair. She saw the ghost of the woman who used to sip mimosas at the country club. One afternoon, while I was sitting in my car across the street, I watched Tasha leave her shift. She was limping slightly. She sat on a bench outside the store and took off her shoe, rubbing her foot. A group of girls walked by laughing and drinking iced lattes. They looked like Tasha used to look, carefree, entitled. Tasha watched them. I saw a hunger in her eyes, but it was not just for the coffee. It was a hunger for the ignorance she had lost. She realized that the comfort she had enjoyed her whole life was not a right. It was a privilege built on my back. And now she was carrying her own weight. That evening in the apartment, the fighting stopped. They were too tired to fight. Loretta came home smelling of dish soap and old grease. Tasha came home smelling of cardboard and despair. They sat at the small table eating their meager dinner in silence. "My feet hurt," Loretta whispered, rubbing her swollen ankles. "I do not know how he did it." Who? Tasha asked, picking at her food. Your father, Loretta said. He worked in those warehouses for 40 years, lifting crates, standing on concrete, coming home with his hands bleeding. Tasha looked down. He never complained. Loretta continued softly. He just came home, took a shower, and asked us how our day was, and we complained that he was boring. We complained that he was tired. Tasha put her fork down. Today a customer threw a coupon at me. Tasha said, her voice trembling. Because it was expired, she called me stupid. Loretta reached across the table and took Tasha's hand. It was the first genuine gesture of affection I had seen between them in years. I am sorry, Tasha, Loretta said. Tasha looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. I miss him, Mom, she whispered. I miss Daddy. Not the money. I miss the money too. But I miss him. I miss feeling safe. Loretta nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. We threw away safety for a fantasy, she said. And now we have to live in the reality. I drove away that night, leaving them in their box. It was hard to watch. No man wants to see his wife and child suffer. But pain is a teacher that no one ignores. They were in the crucible now. The heat was burning away the arrogance, the entitlement, and the greed. And if they were lucky, what would be left behind would be something real, something human. But the lesson was not over yet. Redemption is expensive, and they had only just started paying the bill. 6 months is a long time in the life of a man who has finally found peace. It is enough time to learn how to sleep without locking your bedroom door. It is enough time to rediscover the taste of food that was not bought to impress someone else. I had spent the last half year rebuilding my life brick by brick in my small apartment on the South Side. I had reconnected with old friends from the union. I had started fishing again on the weekends. My blood pressure was down. My bank account was growing, not shrinking. I was happy. But the past has a way of knocking on your door just when you think you have changed the locks. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local. I almost let it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. Elijah, a voice rasped on the other end. It was weak and brittle, like dry leaves being crushed. I knew the voice immediately. It was Loretta. But it was not the Loretta who screamed at me in the police station. It was not the Loretta who laughed about my smell on the video. This voice sounded small. It sounded scared. I am sick, Elijah, she whispered. I mean really sick. I have nowhere else to go. Please. Just 5 minutes. I agreed to meet her, not out of love, not out of nostalgia, but because in the logistics business you always close the file. You do not leave loose ends. We met at a small diner on 35th Street, a place with vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. It was the kind of place we used to go to 40 years ago when we were young and broke before the money and the greed poisoned everything. I arrived 10 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and watched the door. When she walked in, I did not recognize her at first. The woman who entered was a ghost. She had lost at least 30 pounds. Her clothes were clean, but they hung off her frame like they belonged to someone else. It was a coat I recognized. A wool trench coat I had bought her 5 years ago. Now the cuffs were frayed and a button was missing. She walked with a limp. Her hair, the hair she used to dye every 3 weeks, was completely gray. She looked older than me. She looked older than God. She saw me in the booth and her face crumpled. She walked over and slid into the seat opposite me. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together on the table to stop them. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Thank you for coming. I did not think you would. I looked at her. I looked for the anger I used to feel. I looked for the betrayal. But there was nothing, just a hollow space where my heart used to be. You said you were sick, Loretta, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I am here. Tell me. She reached into her oversized handbag. It was a cheap knockoff, not the designer bags she used to carry. She pulled out a large manila envelope and slid it across the table. I did not touch it. It is cancer, Elijah, she said. Stage 3. It is in my lungs. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at her. Is this real, Loretta? I asked. Or is this another performance? Is Gavin waiting in the car to celebrate your acting skills? She flinched. Tears welled up in her yellowed eyes. Gavin is in prison, Elijah, she said. You know that. And Tasha does not talk to me anymore. She blames me for everything. I am alone. She pushed the envelope closer. Read it, please. It is the biopsy report from Cook County Hospital. I have been going to the free clinic, but they say I need surgery. They say I need chemotherapy. And I cannot afford the copay. I finally reached out and opened the envelope. I scanned the medical report. It was real. The dates were recent. The diagnosis was grim. Adenocarcinoma. Prognosis poor without immediate intervention. I put the papers back in the envelope. I looked out the window. It was raining. A gray, cold rain that washed the grime off the city streets. "Why are you telling me this, Loretta?" I asked. She reached across the table, trying to touch my hand. I pulled back. "Because I am scared," she sobbed. "Because I am dying, Elijah. And because you are my husband. We were married for 40 years. Does that mean nothing to you? 40 years. I thought about those 40 years. I thought about the double shifts I worked. I thought about the vacations I skipped so she could have a new car. I thought about the way she looked at me at that party in Atlanta like I was something she had stepped in. It means something. Loretta," I said slowly, "it means I wasted 40 years on a woman who never saw me." "Elijah, please," she begged. "I know I was wrong. I was blinded by the money. I was stupid, but I am paying for it. Look at me. I am living in a shelter now. I lost the apartment. I wash dishes until my hands bleed, and I still cannot pay for my medicine." She broke down, weeping into her hands. People in the diner turned to stare. I did not care. Shame is a currency I stopped trading in a long time ago. "I am sorry, Elijah," she choked out. "I am so sorry. If I could go back, if you could go back, you would do it again," I said, cutting her off. "You are only sorry because the bet failed, Loretta. You are only sorry because you are losing." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "That is not true. I love you." I sighed. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I had come prepared. I knew she would ask for money. That is the only language she spoke. I pulled out a white envelope. It was not thick, but it was heavy. I placed it on the table next to her medical reports. "Inside this envelope is a cashier's check," I said. "It is made out to Cook County Hospital. It will cover your surgery and 6 months of chemotherapy. I also included a prepaid card for your living expenses during recovery." Loretta stared at the envelope. Her hands hovered over it, trembling. "Oh, Elijah," she breathed. "Thank you. I knew it. I knew you still loved me. I knew you would save me." She reached for the money, her eyes lighting up with that familiar spark of greed. Even in sickness, the hunger was there. I put my hand over the envelope, stopping her. "Do not mistake this, Loretta," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the wind outside. "This is not love. This is not forgiveness." She froze, looking at me confused. "Then what is it?" she asked. "This is charity," I said. I removed my hand. "I am giving you this because I am a man of principle. I am giving you this because I do not want the people at church or the people in the neighborhood to say that Elijah Vance let a human being die in the street like a dog. I am doing this for my name, not for yours." Loretta recoiled as if the envelope was hot. But we can start over," she stammered. "After the surgery, I can get better. I can cook for you again. I can come to the South Side." "No," I said, standing up. "You cannot come to the South Side, Loretta. You are not welcome there." I buttoned my jacket. I looked down at her one last time. The woman who had been my world was now just a stranger with a familiar face. "This is the last time you will see me," I said. "Do not call me. Do not come looking for me. If you need more money, ask Tasha, or ask the ghost of the husband you killed 3 years ago." "Elijah, wait!" she cried, half rising from her seat. I turned my back on her. I walked to the counter and paid for the coffee. I tipped the waitress $20. As I walked toward the door, I heard her sobbing behind me. It was a deep, guttural sound of total loss. She realized it then. She realized that the money on the table was not a lifeline to me, it was a severance package. She realized that she could buy the medicine to fix her lungs, but she could never buy back the air she had sucked out of our marriage. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain. I did not put up my umbrella. I let the rain hit my face. It felt clean. It felt like baptism. I walked down the street, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the wet pavement. I did not look back at the diner. I did not wonder if she would be okay. I had closed the account. I had settled the debt. And for the first time in 40 years, I was walking alone. And the silence was beautiful. The Amalfi Coast looks exactly like the postcards promised. It is a vertical paradise where the mountains crash into the sea and the houses cling to the cliffs like colorful barnacles. The air smells of lemons and salt water. It does not smell of damp basements. It does not smell of industrial grease. And it certainly does not smell of betrayal. I am sitting on a terrace in Positano. The sun is dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange. A year ago, I was sitting in a police station watching my family disintegrate. Today, I am watching the Mediterranean Sea turn into liquid gold. 365 days. That is how long it has been since I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton and left my old life behind. In the logistics business, we call this a total restructure. You tear down the inefficient systems, you fire the redundant personnel, and you rebuild from the ground up. It was not easy at first. Solitude is addictive, but it can also be lonely. For the first few months, I stayed in my apartment on the south side. I read books. I listened to jazz. I healed. But a ship is safe in the harbor, but that is not what ships are built for. I realized that I had spent 40 years working and saving for a future that I was now living in. It was time to set sail. So I joined a travel group, the Golden Horizons. It is a club for retired professionals who want to see the world not from a bus window, but with their own 2 feet. There are 12 of us. We are a motley crew. There is Bob, a retired plumber from Ohio who can fix anything with a paperclip. There is Susan, a former nurse who makes sure we all take our vitamins. And then there is Clara. Clara is a retired school principal from Boston. She has silver hair that she wears in a loose braid and eyes that crinkle when she smiles, which is often. She does not wear diamonds. She wears a wooden necklace carved by her grandson. We met on the flight to Rome. I was struggling with the overhead bin, my bad shoulder acting up. In my old life, Tasha would have rolled her eyes and sighed at my slowness. Loretta would have pretended not to know me, but Clara just stood up and helped me push the bag in. "Teamwork makes the dream work," she said, winking at me. We started talking. We talked for 8 hours straight. We did not talk about stock portfolios or real estate values. We talked about books. We talked about history. We talked about the students she had helped and the drivers I had managed. She told me about her dream to build libraries in rural communities. I told her about the Vance Trust and the land in Mississippi that was now a sanctuary for orphans. Her eyes lit up, not with greed, but with genuine admiration. "That is a beautiful legacy, Elijah," she said. "You built something that matters." For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a wallet, not as an ATM machine, but as a man. This morning we hiked the Path of the Gods. It is a trail high up in the mountains. My knees hurt and I had to stop to catch my breath a few times. But nobody rushed me. Nobody called me a slow old man. Bob waited with me telling bad jokes until I was ready to move. Clara shared her water bottle with me. "We are in this together, Elijah," she said. "We start together, we finish together. We start together, we finish together." It is such a simple concept, but it is one my own family never understood. To them, I was just the engine that pulled the train. If the engine broke down, they didn't try to fix it. They just looked for another train. My phone buzzed on the table, interrupting my thoughts. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. The area code was from Illinois, and the caller ID tag said Cook County Correctional Facility. It was Gavin. He calls once a month, usually when he has run out of commissary money or when he has exhausted his appeals. He calls begging. He calls threatening. He calls crying. I picked up the phone, but I did not answer. I just looked at it. I could picture him. He is in a cell that is smaller than my bathroom. He is wearing a jumpsuit that scratches his skin. He is eating food that makes my beans and cornbread look like a feast. He is probably telling the other inmates that he is a victim, that he was a CEO, that his father-in-law tricked him. He is probably still spinning the web of lies that got him there in the first place. He wants bail money. He wants a character witness. He wants me to use my connections to get him into a minimum security facility. I remembered the video. I remembered him laughing about putting me in a state home. I remembered him calling my daughter a cow. I remembered the look on his face when the bank account froze. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger requires energy. Anger requires attachment. I felt nothing. He was just a bad shipment that had been written off, a loss that had been adjusted for in the quarterly report. I pressed the button on the side of the phone, the one that sends the call to voicemail. Then I opened the settings menu. I went to the blocked numbers list. I added the new number. Confirm, block the screen asked. I tapped yes. The phone went silent. The vibration stopped. The connection was severed. I put the phone face down on the table. "Is everything okay?" Elijah, Clara asked. She was sitting across from me holding a glass of white wine. The sunset light caught the silver in her hair, turning it into a halo. She looked concerned. I smiled at her. A real smile, one that reached my eyes. "Everything is perfect, Clara," I said. "Just a telemarketer, someone trying to sell me something I do not need." "What were they selling?" she asked, taking a sip of wine. "Bad memories," I said, "and I am not buying any more." The waiter arrived at our table. He was a young Italian man with a white apron. He carried a bottle of Chianti, the expensive kind with the black rooster on the label. He did not look down on me. He did not treat me like the gardener. He treated me like a king. "Signore," he said, pouring the wine into my glass. "The vintage you requested. It has had time to breathe." I watched the dark red liquid swirl in the glass. I picked it up. My hand was steady. I looked around the table. Bob was laughing at something Susan said. The other members of the group were passing around a plate of calamari, sharing food like a family, a real family. I looked at Clara. She raised her glass to mine. "To new horizons," she said softly. "To new horizons," I repeated. We clinked glasses. The crystal rang out with a clear, pure note, a note that sounded like freedom. I took a sip. The wine was rich and complex. It tasted of earth and sun and time. It tasted of patience. I thought about Tasha. I hoped she was okay. I hoped she was still working. I hoped she was learning that the wine tastes better when you earn the money to buy it yourself. I hoped that one day she would be able to sit at a table like this and feel the peace I was feeling now. But that was her journey, not mine. I had carried her for 35 years. I had carried Loretta for 40. My back was tired. Now I was only carrying myself, and I was surprised at how light the load felt. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the sea. The sun had disappeared, leaving behind a sky full of stars. The lights of the boats were twinkling on the water, mirroring the heavens. I am 72 years old. My knees creak when it rains. I have a scar on my heart from the people I loved most. But I am here. I am breathing the Italian air. I am drinking the best wine. I am surrounded by people who know my name and not my net worth. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. It was a rhythmic, steady sound, like a heartbeat. It was the sound of a life that had been reclaimed. I opened my eyes and looked at Clara. "You know," I said, "I was thinking about that library project you mentioned. The one in the mountains." She smiled. "The one we do not have funding for yet." "The one you do not have funding for yet," I corrected her. "I think the Vance Trust might be looking for a new partner. I have a feeling the board of directors would be very interested." "Who is the board of directors?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. I took another sip of wine. "Me," I said, "and I am very easy to convince, especially over a good glass of Chianti." Clara laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that mixed with the sea breeze. I sat there in the twilight, feeling the warmth of the evening. They had tried to bury me. They had tried to put me in the basement. They had tried to erase me. But they forgot one thing. I am a seed, and when you bury a seed, it does not die, it grows. I raised my glass to the empty chair beside me, to the ghost of the old Elijah. "You did good, kid," I whispered. "You finally delivered the package." I drank the wine. I watched the stars. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The end. This is Elijah Vance signing off from the Amalfi Coast. If you enjoyed my story, if you have ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from. And remember, the only person who can define your worth is you. Do not let anyone give you a discount on your own life. Take care of yourselves. And never forget to read the fine print. The paperwork on the desk looked innocent enough. Just a stack of crisp white pages bound together with a simple staple. But in the world of logistics, I know that the most dangerous things often come in plain packages. This was my last will and testament, the final manifest of my life. For 40 years, my will had been a simple document. It said that upon my death, everything goes to my beloved wife Loretta and my darling daughter Tasha. It was a standard boilerplate agreement, the kind of document a man signs when he assumes that love is unconditional and that loyalty is guaranteed by blood. But I am not that man anymore, and that family does not exist anymore. Saul sat across from me holding his fountain pen. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Are you sure about this, Elijah?" he asked. "This is unprecedented. Most clients leave a token amount, a safety net. You are creating a gauntlet." I picked up the document and read the clause again. To my daughter, Tasha Vance, I bequeath the opportunity to inherit 20% of the estate. This inheritance is conditional and deferred for a period of 5 years. The funds will be released only upon the presentation of 5 consecutive years of tax returns showing gainful full-time employment and a credit report showing 0 consumer debt. If she fails to meet these criteria, or if she incurs any criminal charges, the funds will revert immediately to the Vance Charity Trust. I looked up at Saul. "I am not building a safety net, Saul," I said. "I am building a ladder. A safety net catches you when you fall and lets you lie there. A ladder forces you to climb." Saul nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. "And Loretta?" he asked. I turned the page. "To my ex-wife Loretta, I leave the sum of $1. This amount is to ensure that she cannot contest the will by claiming she was forgotten." She was not forgotten. She was remembered perfectly. The rest of the estate, 80% of everything I had built over a lifetime of sweat and sacrifice, was designated for the people who actually needed it. The orphans, the sick children, the kids in the South Side who needed scholarships to trade schools so they could learn how to build things with their hands instead of destroying things with their greed. I signed the document. The scratch of the pen on the paper was loud in the quiet office. "It is done," I said, capping the pen. Saul took the papers and slid them into his briefcase. "You know, Elijah," he said, leaning back in his chair, "in 30 years of practicing law, I have never seen a man dismantle his own dynasty with such precision. I did not dismantle it." "Saul," I corrected him, standing up. "I fumigated it. A house cannot stand if the termites are eating the beams. I just cleared out the rot so something new can grow." I walked out of Saul's office and into the afternoon sun. The city of Chicago was bustling around me. People were rushing to meetings, rushing to buy things, rushing to impress people they didn't like. I used to be one of them. I used to think that the measure of a man was the size of his house or the brand of his suit. I walked to the parking lot. In the corner away from the shiny BMWs and the Teslas sat my truck. It is a 1978 Ford F-150. It is painted a faded blue that looks like an old pair of jeans. There is a dent in the rear bumper from when I backed into a loading dock in '85. The seats are cracked leather that smell of coffee and diesel. My family hated this truck. Loretta refused to ride in it. She said it vibrated too much. She said it ruined her hair. Tasha called it an eyesore. She begged me to sell it and buy a Mercedes. Gavin laughed at it. He called it a relic. They were right. It is a relic. It is a relic of a time when things were built to last, a time when you fixed what was broken instead of throwing it away. I climbed into the cab. The engine started with a roar, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated in my chest. I rolled down the window and rested my arm on the doorframe. I drove out of the city. I didn't have a destination. I just wanted to drive. I passed the old brownstone on the Gold Coast. I saw a moving truck out front. New owners were moving in, a young couple. They looked happy. I hoped they would have better luck with the place than I did. I hoped they would fill the rooms with laughter instead of secrets. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was fleeting. That house was just a pile of bricks. My home was not there anymore. My home was inside me. I drove south past the distribution center. I slowed down as I passed the employee entrance. I saw Tasha. She was on her break, sitting on a concrete barrier, smoking a cigarette. She looked tired. Her uniform was stained. She was rubbing her neck. She looked up as my truck passed. For a second, our eyes met. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just nodded. A sharp, quick nod. It was a nod of recognition. Not of a daughter to a father, but of a worker to a worker. She was acknowledging the grind. She was acknowledging the reality. I nodded back and kept driving. She was going to be okay. It would be hard. She would cry. She would curse my name some nights when the rent was due and the fridge was empty. But she would survive. And in 5 years, if she stuck to the plan, she would inherit something far more valuable than money. She would inherit her dignity. As for Gavin, I heard he was transferred to a medium security facility in downstate Illinois. He is working in the prison laundry. I like the irony of that. The man who wanted to launder millions is now washing dirty socks for 20 cents an hour. Justice is not always swift, but when it arrives, it has a sense of humor. I turned onto the highway heading west. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold. The road stretched out before me, endless and open. I thought about the question people always ask me. Do I regret it? Do I regret cutting them off? Do I regret watching them fall? Do I regret being alone at 72? I reached over and turned on the radio. An old blues song filled the cab. A song about hard times and good women and the long road home. I smiled. Regret is for people who leave the job unfinished. Regret is for people who look at the manifest and realize they forgot the most important cargo. I didn't forget anything. I provided for them for decades. I gave them love. I gave them shelter. I gave them every opportunity to be decent human beings. And when they chose to throw it away, I gave them the only thing left that could save them. I gave them the truth. The truth is a heavy load to carry. It broke Loretta. It crushed Gavin. But Tasha is carrying it. She is staggering under the weight, but she is carrying it. And me. I am lighter than I have ever been. I tapped the steering wheel to the rhythm of the music. The engine hummed a steady song of reliability. I am Elijah Vance. I am a logistician. I am a father. I am a survivor. And finally, I am free. I checked my rearview mirror one last time. The city was fading behind me, shrinking into the distance until it was just a smudge on the horizon. I turned my eyes to the road ahead. The future was unwritten. And for the first time in my life, I was the only one holding the pen. I shifted gears and accelerated, driving into the sunset, not as an ending, but as a beginning. The shipment was delivered. The books were balanced. It was a good run. I learned that silence is not weakness. It is the loudest courtroom where the guilty convict themselves. For decades, I thought providing financially was the ultimate expression of love. But I was wrong. Unchecked generosity breeds entitlement, not gratitude. The most painful lesson wasn't seeing my wife and daughter betray me, but realizing I had enabled their behavior by never saying no. Family isn't just about whose blood runs in your veins, it is about whose hand holds yours when the money runs out. Respect is not an inheritance you give away. It is a standard you must enforce, even if it means walking alone. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to make the hard choice to protect your own peace, let me know in the comments below. Type respect. If you believe that dignity cannot be bought, do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories about real people facing real battles. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to take back control of your life. My name is Elijah, and this has been my story. Thank you for listening. And remember, the road is long, but the view is always better from the driver's seat. See you in the next one.